Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Rivers Trust's 2023 annual conference. For anyone who is new to the event or to any Rivers Trust events, my name is Rebecca Duncan. I'm the PR and events coordinator here, and luckily or unluckily for you, I'm going to be taking you through much of today's proceedings. If you just bear with me 1 second, I have some introductory slides to share, which I am going to get up now. So here we are, coming back to the theme of this whole event, an integrated future for water management. And this is something that is really at the heart of the Rivers Trust's mission. We want everyone who possibly can to be working together to create a better future for our rivers. So yesterday we covered topics around water governance, regulation, enforcement. We had conversations about different types, about sewage pollution in particular. And then we looked at nature-based solutions in the afternoon, our ambition for them. We want to see them embraced on a wide landscape scale to really aid nature's recovery and help to adapt to, frankly, a quickly changing climate. And what was really clear to me personally was how much energy and expertise and passion is right here at our fingertips, just in this virtual room. And we really just need to harness that to really improve rivers for the future. Today, we're going to change our focus to 2 other key pillars, so to speak, of that integrated future for water management. So we'll start in the morning with effective data and monitoring, and then we're going to move in the afternoon to community buy-in and partnerships. So if we take a quick look at the agenda ahead, as I said this morning, we'll start with effective data and monitoring. Well, we talk a lot at the Rivers Trust about being a science-led charity. It informs everything we do. Data and evidence really drives a lot of our work forward. If you think about an issue such as sewage pollution that we covered in depth yesterday, our now quite famous sewage map was the brainchild of those in our technical team, and they are constantly innovating and coming up with new ways to share that data, make it available, accessible to the public, and as well as those working across the water industry, the environment sector, and others. But as many of you will be all too well aware, sewage is just one issue affecting our rivers today. So this morning, we're going to have a bit of a focus in this session on data and monitoring at some other types of pollution that are really blighting rivers. So we're going to have some focus on nutrient pollution, chemical pollution, and then plastic pollution as well. But we know that that data can only go so far if it isn't accessible and usable to the public. So we're also going to cover that in this morning's session. We want to put that data in a very real context that's relevant for everyone. And that also leads nicely into the theme for this afternoon about community buy-in and partnerships. Yesterday afternoon in particular did touch on partnerships maybe with the commercial sector and opportunities for leveraging green finance to improve the environment. But this afternoon session will probably focus more on river user groups and other NGOs, for example, to see the opportunities that are there. It also includes a spotlight on the Rivers Trust's All Ireland work. So that's across Northern Ireland and Ireland, and that has been proliferating massively in recent years. So I think that will be a really good chance to hear about what's been going on there. I am happy to share that this session will also see a return of Poets of the Planet. For anyone who attended our conference last year, we did have some poetic interventions throughout the conference. There will be more of that this afternoon, and I'm really happy that Ian McLaughlin from Poets for the Planet is going to be delivering a short talk as well. So I'm sure that will provide a very rousing end to the conference before our Chief Executive, Mark Lloyd, then delivers his closing remarks. I forgot to do this yesterday, but I am just going to take a couple of minutes to reiterate the housekeeping points for both sessions today. We've got Q&As running throughout the day. Every session has Q&As involved. So if you've got questions for our speakers, please use the Q&A function for that. to submit your questions, and we will keep track of them. And then you can use the chat function either in the main session or in the lobby to just share thoughts and comments. And I can see some people in the lobby already have been sharing where they're joining from today. Please do feel free to do that. It's great to see where people come from. We do sometimes get some international attendees as well, which is always really good to see. We also have closed captions available on today's events, so you can start those captions by clicking CC at the bottom of your Zoom window and then go to show subtitle, and you can also change the size there if that helps you. And just a final note that the event is being recorded. That doesn't mean that as an attendee you will be on camera in any way, but we will share the event recording on our YouTube channel afterwards. Now, for anyone who's attended our sessions before, we do like to start in the morning with a little icebreaker just to get people thinking and talking. Last year, I decided to ask for all of your suggestions to make a Rivers Trust themed playlist on Spotify, and it was brilliant. The suggestions flew in, and that Spotify playlist is still available if you fancy listening at any point. So that was last year. This year, I am going for a slightly different tactic. So I've just got a question that is, who is your hero and why? So I'd really like to see answers in the chat to this. This could be someone inside the environmental sector, outside of the environmental sector. Just who is your hero and why? While you're thinking on that, I'm going to take the opportunity to just plug a few upcoming events that the Rivers Trust are involved in that are very close to my heart in particular. So first of all, coming up in about, well, almost exactly a month's time, we're incredibly proud this year to be partnering with Hay Festival. It's one of the leading artistic and cultural events in the calendar, frankly, worldwide. That festival runs from the 25th of May to the 4th of June, and we're really pleased we're sponsoring 2 events there. So on Tuesday, the 30th of May, our Comms and Advocacy Director, who you met yesterday, Tessa Wardley, will be speaking to Patrick Barkham about his new book, The Swimmer. That's all about Roger Deakin, who, for those into outdoor and wild swimming, will know is credited basically with popularising wild swimming in the UK, and he leaves quite a legacy today, I think it's safe to say. The next day, on the 31st of May, we've got Jyoti Banerjee, Simon Evans of Why and Usk Foundation, and Tessa Wardley in conversation with the broadcaster Nicola Kutcher for a deeper dive into what the problems and solutions are for our rivers today. So you can head to the Hay Festival website and just use any of those search terms, or search by the date if you're interested in joining us in beautiful Hay on Wye in a month's time. At the start of June, we are heading to the equally glamorous location of Telford International Centre for the CIWEM Flood and Coastal Conference. That's the Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Management. So we are sponsoring the second day of that event, and it's all going to be about nature-based solutions, scaling up ambition for them, evidence and delivery. So if you particularly enjoyed yesterday afternoon's event here, maybe you would be interested in joining us for that as well. There are also lots of interactive workshops that go alongside the main conference programme there, so lots to get involved with. And again, if you just search CIWEM Flood and Coastal, it will be the first thing that comes up on your search engine. Finally, we've got the Outdoor Swimmer Henley Swim Festival on Sunday, the 9th of July. We will be there. We have a stall. We're going to be interacting with people. We do have, I think, a limited number of fundraising places available. So get in touch if you're interested in fundraising for the Rivers Trust at the Henley Swim Festival over any distance, from half a mile up to 4 miles. And we are really hoping for, as it was last year, a beautiful sunny day down in Henley on Thames. So back to the icebreaker. I can see a few messages coming in the chat. So hopefully you're all thinking hard about who your hero is and why. Personally, well, I'll share mine if you'll indulge me. So Some people may be aware on this webinar, people who work with me might be aware that I am a huge tennis fan. Cannot play to save my life. I have all the coordination of a bowl of jelly, but I basically watch tennis whenever I can on the telly almost every week of the year. So my ultimate hero is the legend Billie Jean King. And I wanted to reflect how, even though she's not per se to do with the environment sector, she has really influenced the work that I'm doing in the environment sector today. I recently read her autobiography, All In, that came out a couple of years ago, incredibly inspiring. So Billie Jean King, she's not just incredibly talented, she got to the top of her game in sport and achieved basically as much as she possibly could achieve, but she did that and she made personal sacrifices on numerous occasions to kick the door open and hold it open for others. She is basically the founder, along with a group that are called the Original 9 other women, who left the tennis tour at the time to form the women's tour, and that is basically has a legacy that is still there today. And she still works into her 70s on various business ventures and charity ventures to help create opportunities for people who may not have had those in the past. And I think I just wanted to share this particular quote that I think is really inspiring. Create your legacy and pass the baton. And I think that is really transferable to what all of us are doing today. And now I'm going to head to the chat to see who everyone else has said. Okay, so the first thing I've seen is Sir David Attenborough. I think that is probably a common one going forward. Who else have we got here? So we've got university professors, Dave Golson, Oliver Gilbert at Sheffield, Greta Thunberg, great example. She has just been amazing in so many ways. Or we've got a surfer, the beaver in general, the beaver, great shout out to the beavers this morning. Anyone who is proactively working to help and restore healthy river catchments, here to that. Aldo Leopold, very influential in developing modern ethics regarding the environment. Interesting, because I studied environmental ethics for a bit and I either have forgotten him or don't remember, so that's some research for me. Richard Feynman, great shout. We've got a shout out to a Rivers Trust leader, Sarah Hughes, brilliant. Robin Wall Kimmerer, that's come up in something else I've been doing this week. George Monbiot, Peter Hammond. Yep, I think Peter may have even registered for this conference. So if you're here, Peter, good morning to you. Some people saying Rebecca Duncan. I think those are trolls. I will just really quickly scroll down to the bottom to see what else we've got here. Oh, Chris Boardman, yeah. He's been doing loads of campaigning on cycle safety. Brilliant. Biology teachers, I think teachers are also a really common one. It's, yeah, teaching such an important job. Well, I'll bring this to a close, so I'll stop sharing my screen. I don't want to hold things up anymore, but if you feel the need, do continue sharing your heroes. That was a really nice start to the day. But it's time to bring in now another hero, I think we'll all agree, Dave Johnson, our technical director. You had a little preview of Dave's work yesterday when he was chairing our session on climate change. But now Dave is going to continue to inspire us, I'm sure, by taking us through some of the data that we work with and why and how we do that work. And Dave, I will leave it to you and I'll see you for the questions on the other side.
Thank you very much, Becca, and morning to everyone. So what I'm talking about today is what we do with the data that we've got. And this is a team, because it's very much a team effort. And one of the things that me and Michelle, well, we've got two things we really love about our work is firstly the team that built over the last sort of 10 years, I guess. But also the fact that what we're trying to do is build something, and it's very different from the consultancy background we came from, where you're really trying to keep on putting bricks in the wall and build something bigger and keep going. So this is our first kind of tagline as a team. We want every community to know as much about their catchment as government agencies do. It's very much about levelling up the playing field, really, and the CABA data package has been sort of, is the core of that, I guess. It's been, we first published it 10 years ago, and we've kept the structure the same for those 10 years. And that's not because it's a perfect structure. It's more because it really it allows people to find the data they want. If they become familiar with it and they know where all the data is, we just keep the structure the same. And because there's 200 data sets or more in there at the moment, so you need that kind of consistency. But what I want to talk about this morning is not so much the data package itself. We talk about that a lot. It's more about the stuff that goes on around it that makes it kind of work. And so the first thing is improving Esri's functionality. There's a number of members of the team who actively participate in the Esri forums, upvoting new ideas for functionality that's required. And one of them, this add data widget, was one that Kat from the team particularly wanted, and she kept on upvoting it. And then as soon as that functionality was there, she put it straight into the data package, and that allows you to add in your own data so that you can see that along with the basic data that we provide. And the next thing that we do is the user guide, which we now call the CABA and Nature Recovery Network evidence base. And that again has evolved over the last 10 years, and we have every data set in there, and we explain how it can be used appropriately and how it can be used inappropriately. And we also put in there extra data that's not actually available in the data package, but is available locally from a local authority or from a water company, because half the battle is knowing what data is out there and then knowing what to ask for. So that's all incorporated into the user guide. Then we've got a feedback tab, so that anyone who's using the data package can get in touch with us. It goes straight to the info@catchment-based approach mailbox. And then one member of the team, each of us take it in turns to have a week on the mailbox so that we can collect the messages as soon as they come in, and then answer them if they're queries about a particular data set or something that people want to do. We sometimes get messages that a data layer is broken, so that's really useful, so we can just go in and fix the link. Or we get people identifying new data that we're missing, and that's really useful because that then helps us kind of go look for that data and then potentially add it in later. Of course, it becomes increasingly difficult to find new data, and so we've got an update page, and what I've circled here is the CSO data that we added earlier this month. So you can just check that and see what new data layers have been added. We're not as good as we should be actually at populating this, but we're trying to get that functionality is there, and we're trying to get make sure we always put that in this when we add new data. Kind of a good example of that kind of hive mind, where we're trying to access data from all sorts of different places. This is some work recently that Chris in the team has been doing with Natural England, where they'd produced some data, but they couldn't actually publish it themselves. And so they asked if we would publish it. So Chris published it and then slotted it into the data package. So it's data on accessibility and green and blue infrastructure standards and so forth. So it's, again, it's that kind of hive mind. The original data package started off in one person's head. Now we've got tens of people's contributing to it and making the data package infinitely better as a result. The data package as it stands at the moment is for England, but our colleagues on the island of Ireland have already created a data package for the whole of Ireland with the same structure. And we're going to do the same in Wales and Scotland this year in partnership with Wildfowl and Wetland Trust. And of course, that's a good thing to do anyway. But one of the unexpected benefits, I think, of doing that is that, of course, the data sets that are available in each country are actually quite different. So we can't do exactly the same thing in each country. But that difference also helps us identify opportunities. So, for example, in Scotland recently, when we looked at the CaSTCo data, the combined sewer outfall data, we found out that there was volume information in there, and there isn't volume information in the English data set. So instantly it gives you that opportunity to go back to the English data owners and go, look, they've managed to produce volume data in Scotland. Could we have that in England as well? So it helps us sort of learn from each other and learn that sort of good practice. We've got LNRS and Nature Recovery Network. Now they're launching, I think they've launched this month officially, and they need data to support the LNRS process. We've offered them the CABA data package because it's got most of the, if not all, virtually all the data that they need. At the moment, they've decided they're going to produce their own data portal. And as soon as they let us know all the data that they want in their data portal, we'll make sure that it all goes into the CABA data portal as well. As I say, I think most of it's in there already, but until we know exactly what they want, we can't add it in. And thematic explorers, I've just taken an example here. So we've got the, if you think of the CABA data package as the kind of, the main resource, we extract subsets of data from that into thematic explorers. And the one that I've put here is for wetland, for delivery of wetlands around the country. So it's just a subset of the data and makes it easier for people to access it. I don't want to have too many of these, to be honest, because every explorer needs to be kept up to date. So, but they are useful, and we've got a number of them. And then finally, in this first point, journalists. This is a development in the last couple of weeks. Journalists got in touch and wanted to write a story, and so I took them to the data package and helped them learn to use it. And I think, that's where I'd love to be in a couple of years' time, where journalists are routinely accessing the CABA data package to inform and help, make their stories more relevant and more kind of evidence-based, which kind of neatly takes us on to the second tagline, which is informing the debate and being honest with the data. And that's the what we've got here is the sewage map, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. But again, what I wanted to sort of focus on was the stuff around the sewage map that we try and do. So, we're really keen to make sure that people understand the data. It's not just putting it out there and shouting and making a lot of noise. We want people to understand the data, because that then makes the debate so much, richer and more interesting. So we put that in there. We also want to help people investigate the data and really milk all the understanding they possibly can. So we want to make it easy as possible for them. And a lot of the filters that Heather has put into the tool here are based on questions that people had asked us on that feedback tab, that comes into our inbox. But it's all too easy in GIS to create summary data that doesn't really mean anything. So we've really resisted the temptation to produce summary data that says, which is the worst CSO in the country, which is, a CSO is getting worse, or are they getting better? Because that data is not meaningful. And I think part of that kind of our responsibility is to make sure we use data as honestly as possible. And that really moves the debate forward. And kind of another example of that is the State of the Rivers report, and that we did last year. And I think one of the things that was really good in terms of the feedback was the fact that people said what they did was they read the text, and then as soon as they got to a map, they went into their own backyard to find out what was going on in their backyard. So making the data relevant to people which we can do so easily now, is, you know, another really important part of what we're trying to do. So the third kind of part of what of our sort of our goals is this, to support collective action. And what we've talked about so far is a very one-way process. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to access the data and understand it and use it in their work. But these hubs are much more kind of two-way, and they're allowing people to upload information themselves so that it can drive collective action on the ground. And the Ag Hub here is a good example of that. A farm advisor can log in, upload their details and the area that they cover, and the sort of, in terms of spatially, and also the sort of subjects that they cover, like natural flood management or biodiversity net gain. And then a farmer can come onto that map and go, right, I need some advice. Who have we got in our area who can give me the advice I need? And you have the same with funding initiatives as well. So a farmer can find not only an advisor, but also the funding to go with it. And we also allow the ability to upload case studies and spatially, so because farmers find, you know, it's far more impactful learning from their peers than learning from anywhere else. So it's really useful to say, if there's a cover crop trial that's gone on nearby, they can see that location and potentially go and visit and find out more about it. And then the final bit of functionality is find local community groups. So again, it's the community group has the ability to upload and manage their own information and own it. But then other people can see what community groups are there and then join them. And the two that we've kind of added in, and we only added this functionality in last week, is that they can see farm cluster groups and they can see flood action groups. Of course, at the moment, there's not much data in there because, you know, the groups have got to add it themselves. So that's the kind of, that's putting people in touch. It's almost like a dating sort of service for people who are interested in that collective action. The second part of it is the action bit and delivering on the ground. And the NFM Hub is a really good example of what we're trying to do there. So anybody who is delivering green infrastructure on the ground can add their asset into this database. They log in and they own that data, so they can reuse it themselves in their own maps and so forth. And they can produce their own reports about what they're doing and show their activity to funders and so forth. And they can track their project all the way through, from opportunity all the way through to being delivered and maintained. So we're trying to create a pipeline of investable projects. And, you know, our work on the Wire NFM Green Finance project really sort of helped us understand what investors wanted. So we provide the data structure so that as organisations deliver interventions, they can record this extra information that the market really needs and wants to see. And I think, you know, what we're trying to do here is treat green infrastructure with the same respect that engineers treat the grey infrastructure. You know, an engineer wants to know where their asset is, what function it provides, and is it being maintained and looked after. And it's exactly the same for the green infrastructure that we're building now. We want to know that it's where it is, and we want to know that it's being looked after and adapted, because it's providing those functions that we all know well. And then I guess the final part of what we want to do is, our final tagline is, we want communities to know more than government agencies about their own catchment, and that's where citizen science comes in, and that's where the next talk comes in. Okay, that's for me. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dave. Fantastic start, and yeah, just a really good summary, I think, of why our data work is so important to us. please do send in your questions for Dave via the Q&A function. We've got a few minutes left for that time. I'll start with one. Obviously, you and I do work together sometimes. You mentioned journalists. I do our press engagement as well at the Rivers Trust, and sometimes we do get asked questions that we feel like we can't maybe responsibly answer. So it can be challenging, and I very much appreciate that. So if we're making this data easier to access for, in theory, anyone, is there a risk that people will use it inappropriately?
I think it's almost certain they will. And it's a risk that it's better than the alternative. You know, if as people start using the data and you know, someone uses it inappropriately, there will be comments, there will be feedback, and that will move the debate forward. It's so much better than holding on to the data or not letting it out there. I think it's much better to allow a small amount of chaos to inform the debate, and then it all becomes so much more informed and interesting. So yeah, I think it's inevitable that it will happen, but we shouldn't get cross with people because I misinterpret data, and you know, and people correct me, and that's all just part of the process.
Yeah, I definitely do too. Okay, another question. So we talked about, you mentioned the hive mind, and I think Tessa also alluded to that in her introduction yesterday, the kind of the wisdom of the group. And we had one comment from Jeff in the chat about maybe the diversity of the group that you're involved with. Can you talk a bit, because I know that you have been doing some work, say, with Birmingham City University, to try and maybe improve the diversity of the work that you're doing. Is that fair? Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've always found is that within our team, and is that we keep on employing people who look, you know, I won't say that we all look the same, but we kind of come from a very similar background. You know, every time we advertised, we were finding we were getting the same sort of people because they were coming from the same places we came from. And we, you know, no matter where we advertised, we didn't make much, we weren't making much impact. So I thought, well, we're going to have to get on the front foot a bit with this and start talking to people that we don't normally talk to. So we went to Birmingham City University, had a link up with them, and you know, I think it was so much, it had so much more impact. We offered them an internship and said, look, you know, someone can come and work with us, and Nabil came and worked with us for summer last year. And this year, what we're doing with them is we've set them an engineering challenge to design and build and test a soil health monitor. And so you've got this, you know, really diverse group of engineers challenged with this. And it's been really interesting watching the work develop, because as the groups have been coming in and talking to us, a lot of the people have said, you know, we didn't even know you existed, we didn't know anything about you. And now some of them are getting enthused. Some of them, I have to say, are not enthused, but that's fine. That's all part of the package. So we're trying to get a bit more on the front foot, and you know, and proactively go out and try and get more people engaged and interested. It's also the case that I would love to get this data package in as a standard in university courses. You know, yeah. And they graduate with that kind of knowledge.
Brilliant, thank you. Sorry, I hit you with a tricky question there, but you answered it brilliantly. We've got a few questions coming in the Q&A now. So Ed has asked, are there any upcoming data sets that you're particularly excited about?
I'm always excited about data. I think you know that. I mean, I'm keen to get all the data sets in there for the Nature Recovery Network, you know, for the local nature recovery strategies. I mean, you know, I think that's a whole new group of people. And as I said, hopefully we've got most of the data sets they want, but there will be a few that we don't know about, and that will really help our biodiversity work and so forth. So I think that's, that's really good to get in there. I'm really keen on the stuff that Chris is doing at the moment, which is it's really difficult, but it's the kind of experiential value of blue and green space. So it's not just that that it's there, it's how much benefit do humans actually get when they visit it. I think that's going to be really interesting and useful. And we've been after, as part of the same thing, recreation data. I'd love to get some data out of some of these apps like Strava and so forth that tell us where people are visiting sites and where people aren't visiting, because both information, one tells you places people really value, another tells you places people really avoid. So there's all sorts of data out there that the trick is really not to grab everything, is to try and grab the stuff that will really help partnerships move forward.
Brilliant, thank you. Another couple of questions here. I'm gonna sort of merge two questions from both Liz and Jeff. So Liz has said, could you briefly outline how a community group that's just setting up could use your data to find out more about their local area? For instance, what are the top 3 things they could access, for instance? And Jeff sort of similarly has said, is there a CABA data package for dummies? Because one thing with the CABA data package is that there is so much there. It's very hard if you're just going to the data package to have a look around. It's easier to maybe have something in mind that you're trying to find and then go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a series of webinars where we kind of go through certain elements of the data package, and we record those and host them on the CABA data hub. And I must check that we've got them there, but I think we've got sort of quite a lot of recordings on there now. So we do have those. I think it would be good to do a really basic one right at the start. So I think that's just a really good idea, something that we can do this year and upload it onto the hub. And then it's just, as you say, that basic introduction that just takes people through and helps them start that process.
Yeah, that sounds like one for you and me to organise. Yeah. And just on those webinar recordings for CABA, and you were talking about the experiential data to do with how people are experiencing these green and blue spaces. And I think for me, one of the highlights of the data cabbage is the one relating to health. Yes. So there are, I think we've done at least one webinar on that where Ellie from Ribble Rivers Trust, shout out to her, has collated loads of data, things like GP surgeries and that kind of thing, to talk about how that could influence the work of, say, community groups, local trusts, to offer things like social prescribing. There is so much that people could get into just from that data package. But the other thing is that there's just the CABA email address, info@catchmentbasedapproach.org, I believe. I hope I've got that right. So if you come to us with a specific question, we'll be able to point you to the relevant data sets. Another question here from Joanna. First of all, great presentation, David. So she said, Ireland and Northern Ireland are being added to the sewage discharge map for the first time. At the moment, we don't have any real-time data from Northern Ireland water or Irish water, and are unlikely to get it for a few years. So do you have any thoughts on how we, and Joanna is in our communications team, for anyone who doesn't know, how do we engage the public on the island of Ireland for the first time with data, but we don't have the real-time data? We don't have the depth of data that we do for England, Wales or Scotland in Ireland at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And when we put the first version of the sewage map ever out, it didn't have real-time data in there. It just said where sewage discharges were. So it was just the discharge data. And you know, the first set of feedback was really, well, I'm better off swimming upstream of that point than downstream of it. Absolutely. And it started the discussion. And then we gradually added in more detail, and as more detail came in, the snowball gradually grew and grew and grew. And I think in Ireland, it's going to be very similar, that you start off with something relatively simple, but they'll look across at the data that's being provided elsewhere and go, we want that data. And it just puts that pressure on the authorities to provide the same level of data. I mean, we're actually putting an improvement into the sewage map. I think it's planned for this week. And when that happens, we haven't got the data for the whole country, but we have got this improved data for a small area. And the point of putting it in there is, okay, that helps that particular area where the data is available, but it also means every other area can look at it and go, why haven't we got this data? They've managed to get it. Can we have it too? So I think it's the same process with Ireland is, make it transparent. Let people see what data is there and what isn't there. And then the pressure can be, if they did it in Scotland, they can do it in Ireland too.
Yeah, and if it's really not that great a length of time from when EDM was first brought in England to where we are now with real-time data. We've gone from we are in the process of going from those annual summaries, annual numbers to live real-time data. I think those are all the questions for, there's one more question just come in via the chat. So Vivian has said, how does the CABA data link up with EA data? There's quite a few different examples of that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, an awful lot of the data comes in from the Environment Agency. So what we try and do is consume data directly from the agency. So if they update their data, our data is instantly updated. So that's what we try and do in preference. In other cases, there's some EA data that's published and it's not in a format that's is fine for experts, but it's not terribly good for communities to use. So we republish that data in a more user-friendly format. So for example, the WFD data. And so
that's the Water Framework Directive, sorry. Water
Framework Directive, thanks, Vicky. So I think that, we try and work as well as we can with the Environment Agency. I think we work pretty well with them, and we certainly have regular updates with them. And at the moment, we've got a discussion with their data team about really milking the absolute maximum out of some of their APIs, which are sort of automatic data downloads that we're trying to access. So, it's I think we work pretty well with the agency in terms of daylighting their data, if I'm honest.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll finish with one final question, quite an interesting one from Ed. He said there's been huge media interest in recent developments in artificial intelligence, such as probably the most famous one at the moment, ChatGPT. Do you see that being of any use in the Rivers Trust movement?
Yes, we do, absolutely. And we've had an intern over the last 6 months from the Turing Institute. It's something that Michelle organised. And they came in and they were an artificial intelligence intern, and Michelle threw a whole load of data at them and said, look, try and build a model that will help us move forward in terms of interpreting this data. And it's been absolutely fascinating watching Andrew's work and seeing how it develops. And as happens often with these things, we've at the end of the 6 months, we've moved a decent step forward, but we can see so many more applications, and there's lots of exciting proposals that we've put forward, and we're just looking for funding at the moment to see if we can move them forward. So yeah, I absolutely see a good role for AI potentially in our data use.
Brilliant, thanks, Dave. I'll bring that session to a close here, and I know that Simon, who's going to be up next, is I think ready to go in the background. Also, just reflecting on a comment in the chat from Stephen, who said that the webinars are really useful. Thanks for sharing that. I'm really glad you find the webinars useful, Stephen. And yeah, just to once again encourage anyone who is wondering maybe where to start with using the data that we have available, go to the catchment-based approach website, head to the resources, and there are loads of recordings there. Thanks so much, Dave. you can hopefully enjoy the rest of this in a more relaxed mood now. Simon, if I can ask you to come on camera and on microphone. So Simon's going to be talking us through a more specific example of one of the types of pollution that's affecting rivers. It's quite a high profile one in cases, very high profile cases, such as on Lake Windermere, for instance. There's a big campaign there about Windermere. But Simon, I see you're here now, so I will head over to you to start your presentation. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Becca. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining us here today. My name is Simon Browning. I'm monitoring technical lead at the Rivers Trust. Let me just fire up my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. Remove that off. So I've been asked to chat about nutrient monitoring in the CaSTCo project. So that's two quite sizable issues. I'm going to sort of whistle through them a little bit. I'll start off with an introduction to the CaSTCo project itself. And starting off with really kind of why that project came about. It was a few years ago, 2019. You can trace the origins back to a catchment data user group conference in 2019. And we were really wrestling with this idea that environmental agency monitoring has been declining since probably 2010. You can see here some graphs showing for different parameters the kind of the total number of samples annually from 2000 through to 2022, I think probably. And you can see in recent years, probably since around 2012-13, there's been a real drop-off in data coverage for most of the parameters we're looking at. And this essentially has meant that, whilst we'll still get Water Framework Directive classifications for all water bodies, our kind of faith, our confidence in that data and what those assessments are saying is much lower than it was. So identifying this kind of data gap is a real issue. At that conference, there were some proposals, kind of some solutions discussed, and the mood in the room was definitely in terms of looking at how we could gather more data and how that should be managed, particularly looking at citizen science data and volunteer community groups collecting their own data. The idea that what we have at the moment is kind of a bit of a free-for-all. In some places it's great, in some places there's nothing, but in any case it's not standardized. So there's a real desire for a nationally standardized approach, although it was definitely kind of a flavor of the conference was that it should be sort of not necessarily nationally funded by government, but should be kind of open to local communities and regional sort of catchment partnerships, if you like, to fund and manage that data collection and the standards. And so then what was the catchment monitoring cooperative sort of idea came into existence. A small group of us worked on that, and we put that out to consultation, and it was overwhelmingly supported, as you can see there, by a load of people, nearly 90 responses, and most of them very positive. So then that proposal went through to the Ofwat Innovation Fund and was funded, and then also we were looking at, in terms of citizen science, we've seen a massive rise in people's interest in rivers, and the ability for people to collect data is really improving. But there's still, if you talk to people at environmental agency and water companies and the catchment-based approach movement, there's a kind of not a lot of faith in the quality of that data. At best, the quality is often unknown, and in some places it's kind of deemed as quite low quality. But obviously the threats our rivers are facing, and we've heard about all that in the last couple of days and over the last few months, really require us all to come together to kind of pitch in and help with a solution. The picture there shows some work that was done by, commissioned by the Environment Agency and done by Earthwatch, I think, looking at the different impacts of citizen science. So we know that getting communities, getting volunteers collecting data that informs them about the state of their local environment has a whole host of benefits, rather than it's not just kind of looking for that holy grail of collecting data that can be used for environmental management or enforcement. There's a whole load of things, good things that flow from people getting out there and understanding their rivers more. So the CaSTCo project, essentially then we had the Catchment Monitoring Cooperative, which was this idea of a framework that helps standardize and promote citizen science techniques and look for that kind of assurance on different quality of different techniques. And then through the Ofwat bidding process or application process, we kind of, or that project acquired some other projects that were kind of bolt-ons that were water companies, generally speaking, also applying into that fund. And Ofwat sort of suggested that we put those together, and that's how the Catchment Monitoring Cooperative project became the Catchment Systems Thinking Cooperative. So it kind of has these larger projects bolted on, which are generally speaking kind of tests or pilots of innovative approaches. And we're very much looking at this kind of model on the diagram here, the pyramidal model, where sort of, you know, volunteer monitoring, mass appeal, lots of people can get involved, but the test methods are very low cost, and might not have the kind of, well, won't have the rigor of a sort of a lab analysis. But in the middle there's the tier 2, where you can have kind of more robust techniques, maybe slightly fewer people involved with a bit more of a focus. And all of those data sets can be used and blended to kind of arrive at a more holistic understanding of what's going on in our river environments. And just briefly, some of the kind of highlights of what the CaSTCo project will deliver. So we're already working on the first draft of the Citizen Science Charter is being developed, which is kind of the rules of the game. So the kind of that relationship between volunteers and hosts, maybe, you know, what people will and won't do whilst collecting data, and in turn what hosts will be able to do for those volunteers. So in terms of supporting resources, insurance, health and safety, all that kind of thing. We'll be working on a list of accredited or sort of health checked measurements or methods, so people can understand more about exactly that kind of what different quality criteria they'll need to meet with different methods and what that data can be used for. We'll be obviously working closely on sharing data, and Dave's just talked about, you know, some of the platforms we have for doing that and how that can be expanded to include volunteer data. There are 8 sort of specific demo catchments. There's now another couple that have sort of we're talking to about coming on board as well, and it's entirely possible that there'll be more throughout the duration of the project. And then quite importantly as well, in each of those demos, we'll be encouraging the stakeholders, the monitoring stakeholders in those catchment partnerships, I guess, to come together and pool their resources in terms of in a planned way, so that monitoring can be coordinated amongst, you know, the Environment Agency, the Rivers Trust, the catchment partnerships, the members, and maybe the water companies in there as well. These are the demo catchments spread around the country. They've each got kind of a theme that they're working on, although some of this is in flux a bit as the project sort of ramps up in anger, as it were. Okay, so then the focus of this talk then is particularly on how nutrients kind of fit into this picture, and what CaSTCo will be doing on that front. So nutrients are a huge priority in terms of monitoring and in terms of the health of our rivers. Phosphorus and nitrogen are the main ones that come to play and cause eutrophication. So, you know, at a very basic level, eutrophication is the overabundance of nutrients that leads to a boom in plant growth, often kind of the very fast growing species like the algae and sort of blanket weeds, those kind of things that grow very quickly and will really tip the balance of vegetation and ecology within a water body. The downside of that, of course, is not only that these plants can smother out sort of the sort of native and the natural communities, but as those algae communities die off, or as they respirate, they produce huge swings in dissolved oxygen. So you might get supersaturation during the day of, you know, 200–300% dissolved oxygen, and then correspondingly in the small hours, in the early hours of the morning, those levels can dip right down to dangerously low levels and result in fish kills, particularly in the kind of the long hot summers with low flows and warm temperatures that we're increasingly seeing with climate change. These nutrients, they come from a range of sources. Phosphorus is particularly a marker of treated sewage effluent, and this is not only the detergents and the kind of the organic matter that's in treated sewage or that's left in treated sewage, but drinking water is often dosed with phosphorus anyway, so it comes with a background high level of phosphorus. And of course, you get intermittent then spikes, usually driven by rainfall events from agriculture, fertilizers and manure. And then there's of course a bit of an unknown is septic tanks and sort of private sewage treatment works, often a problem in headwaters. Nitrogen is much more, although they both come, both sources come from sewage and agriculture. Nitrogen is a bit more of a signature from agriculture sources. I'm just going to touch on, I'm not a chemist, thankfully, but it's important if you are in the space of monitoring, collecting data, particularly on nutrients. There are some complexities that I think it really helps to be aware of. We talk about phosphorus and phosphate. Phosphorus is the elemental kind of element, so that's the sort of the big P in the center there, the phosphorus atom. And when we talk about phosphate or orthophosphate, we're talking about the compound that is kind of made up of the phosphorus atom and the four oxygen atoms. That's why you'll often see orthophosphate referred to as PO4. Sometimes you'll see it as referred to PO4 3-. It's the same thing. That's just drawing attention to the three negatively charged oxygen atoms. And why that's important is because you'll see different data sources on nutrients quoting different expressing the units in different ways. It's useful to know that the two are directly related due to the molecular weight, and as you can see here, orthophosphate is going to be the phosphorus times 3.066. So it's a significant difference, and you really need to be knowing which one you're talking about. If you look at the Environment Agency data, the most commonly monitored sort of nutrient that they do is this determinant code 0180. So if you look on the Environment Agency Water Quality Archive, you'll find that data there, and that's referring to orthophosphate, but as P. So they've done that conversion. So it's important to know. Similar issue with nitrogen. So nitrate, ammonia are the most common nutrients we talk about, and most common monitoring is done with those. And a similar situation. So you've got ammonia is nitrogen plus 3 hydrogens, and nitrate is nitrogen plus 3 oxygens. So, and again, you can see there's conversion factors there. Again, significant. So make a big difference if you're measuring one but expressing it in another mistakenly. And again, in terms of Environment Agency data, you'll find ammonia referred to as ammoniacal nitrogen, that code 0111, and nitrate as N, so 0117. So that's just worth knowing, a bit of reference for you there. Current state of play. So this is a map of of England, looking at Environment Agency Water Framework Directive data. This is the overall status of the water bodies. There's you can see there 3,767 water bodies in England. If you look at the phosphate status, this is from 2019, so that's the latest Water Framework Directive status assessments we've got. You can see that quite a few of those are moderate or worse in terms of phosphate status. Actually, it works out as, I think, 54% are failing for phosphate. Looking at the picture for ammonia, it's a lot better. Ammonia tends to be much more short-lived in the environment. It quickly breaks down to nitrate, and then nitrate. But where it does occur, it's quite toxic. So it is a real concern. But as you can see, much less widespread failures according to ammonia. We're down to about 8% of water bodies failing for that. Nitrate isn't quite measured in the same way. It's not part of the Water Framework Directive. It has its own nitrates directive, and the data isn't displayed in the same way, so I've not included that here. If you're out monitoring rivers, or if you're concerned about river health, you can't really escape the impact nutrients have. Looking at various, this is from the US Department of Agriculture, some great advice and resources on volunteer monitoring there. But a lot of the common sources of pollution related to land use have nutrients as a key marker of impact. So then on to CaSTCo a bit, just to finish off. The idea of these accredited methods, so what we're calling a method audit, is to take various methods in different themes, and say there we're referring to water quality, ecology, those kind of things, and run through a process that can be fairly standardized. So start off with a long list, what is available for volunteer monitoring or any kind of monitoring really, and shortlist that by looking at which ones of those are going to be most suitable for volunteers to take forward. And then for those selected methods that are part of the shortlist, we'll produce kind of protocols that take the manufacturer's instructions but move on from that. A lot of those methods are designed for aquaria or swimming pools, so sometimes need a bit of a tweak to make sure that we're using them in the best way for our rivers. And then I don't know if any of you have seen the 2016 Citizen Science Guide. You can download it from the CABA website if you just search for that. But we'll hopefully be we're planning to provide an updated version of that will be kind of online, and will help people filter out or filter towards the techniques that are most suitable for them. Bit of a glimpse into what we're doing behind the scenes with the phosphate method then. So this is essentially the long list. These are all different gadgets or systems that you can use to test for phosphate. And we're collating kind of information, key information on the cost, the accuracy, the range. Is the range appropriate for what we see in our rivers? How easy are they to use? What's the cost of the initial investment versus the cost per test? What is the health and safety implications of using some of these reagents, and considerations like that. But we're already quite close to getting to see it's quite easy to filter out the kind of the dead ends, if you like, and pick on a set of equipment. So although we haven't officially done the shortlisting process yet, you can see that they basically fall into 3 groups initially. We've got the kind of the low cost indicative tests, so things like test strips, or this is a system developed in Japan used by Freshwater Watch, if any of you know that scheme. And you get a result there very quickly. It's very easy to use, but you get a kind of indicative band, you know, it's between 100 and 200 parts per billion sort of thing. Moving up from that, you get to the sort of the 50 to 70 pounds mark, where you get an actual physical readout, so a definite number. It's quite precise, but not necessarily any more accurate in a sense, or that they do have issues around, you know, sensitivity and quality of optics sometimes, but still probably opens up some more data uses on that side of things, because you've got that apparent certainty anyway of what your result is. You don't have this big blurry band. And then with a bit more money, so we are talking sort of 10 times the cost, you can step up another level, and you get, again, sometimes you often get devices that are actually easier to use for volunteers, because there's more thought, more design capability put around into the usability, but also they have superior optics and superior power management, so tend to be kind of a more robust result. And again, you know, this all feeds into that sort of tiered hierarchy of data. You might be able to use the data for some of those from some of those devices for different purposes than you would others. So just wrapping up then, we know that in the demo catchments, most of them are considering nutrients and nutrient monitoring, and there's a variety of activities being planned and underway. I won't read through all those, but you can read those for yourselves. And then obviously you can imagine the benefits then of having that central kind of CaSTCo presence with the technical team at the Rivers Trust, but also our working groups in the CaSTCo project, who have sight across all these different developments, so we can kind of make sure that everyone's talking to each other, and that these studies and trials that are done once can be much more used by other people. So whilst other people, you know, lots of groups will like to do their own kind of quality testing, by no means is that just a one-off done and then forgotten. That data can be used and shared, and will be shared outside the CaSTCo project too. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening. I will stop my sharing screen there.
Thanks, Simon. That was brilliant as a very much whistle-stop tour between amongst two very big topics, as you say. We've got a few questions coming in, so I will come to those. I have a question myself, and we've got further presentations that also touch on citizen science later. But I'm very interested in how you've talked about one of the big aspects of CaSTCo being this standardized approach for testing across the country. Do you find that it's tricky or not to balance that with engaging these community groups who obviously might already have their ways of working, that, you know, that no two community groups are necessarily going to be the same, and, you know, they come from a very grassroots background. So have you found that difficult, or has it been maybe easier than expected?
I think there's a real desire by community groups who are going out in the wet and windy weather all times of the day and night to collect data, but that data has that kind of ring of truth, you know, that kind of authenticity, and that's particularly so with some of these methods which are low cost and they are sort of cheap and cheerful. So I've not come across any resistance to the idea of, you know, what small things can we do, and it usually is quite small, simple things just to make sure that we're collecting data in as robust a way as possible. We get as much value out of that data as possible. Also, it means that if you have some kind of structure, and we're talking about quality assurance plans and monitoring plans that kind of spell out, you know, where and when samples will be collected. So if you have a community group that's targeting the end of sort of sewage discharges, which I don't recommend as a place to go and collect a sample, that data is very different from people who might be looking at sort of a more holistic kind of catchment-based monitoring approach. So I think people are really welcoming that kind of structure and the sort of support in terms of collecting the best data they can.
Great, thank you. So the question at the top of the Q&A actually came in towards the end of Dave's presentation, but I think it does maybe have relevance for CaSTCo as well. Richard has asked, do you recommend the Outfall Safari initiative as an effective vehicle for monitoring rivers?
Yes, in a short answer. I mean, so whilst today I've focused on nutrient monitoring and we're leading on the phosphate monitoring because it's quite a very kind of important and popular and quite complicated, as I hope I've explained, with the various forms of phosphorus. There are a whole load of other methods out there, and Outfall Safari is very well established, and that's definitely one that will be kind of forming part of the mix for CaSTCo. So I'm not in a position to say, do this, do that, but I think that's certainly one that has a kind of a track record and a kind of a load of supporting documentation with it. It's used by a lot of groups, and so it already has that kind of weight of kind of quality with it, I think. Other methods that we know are likely to feature are things like the Army Riverfly initiative, things like MORPH, looking at morphological status, things like the river habitat surveys and river restoration centres, citizen river habitat surveys. So there are a bunch of techniques out there already which we're not going to reinvent. We'll hopefully bring them into the CaSTCo kind of family, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's just a really important point to note, that we're not looking to reinvent the wheel here. We're not looking to reinvent what lots of different groups have already been working on. We are taking it all into consideration. I'm actually going to just refer to a comment in the chat from Kim, who's responding to your point that you said you would not recommend monitoring a river at the point where sewage is discharged into it. And Kim said, surely that has to be the focus of monitoring. So could you maybe just expand on why you wouldn't recommend that?
I wouldn't recommend that because, for a start, it's particularly using the methods we are, so that they're not kind of lab analysis accurate. Also, so sewage works will have discharge consents. So there are levels of pollutants that they're allowed to discharge by law. These are set by the Environment Agency, and they take a lot of work to change. And they are measured in the pipe. So if you take phosphorus, for example, some sewage works, not all by any stretch, have a limit on how much phosphorus they can discharge, and that's measured usually total phosphorus with a sort of lab sample. So if you take a citizen science method and you go in the river very close to that outfall, immediately you lose any ability to relate the value in the river to the value that they're allowed to discharge from their pipe, because it's a different type of phosphorus you're measuring, it's a different measurement technique, and it's immediately you've got the dilution factors. So from that point of view, the data isn't that useful. If you were hoping to say this data shows that the water company is exceeding its discharge consent, it won't be valid for that reason. And then also what we tend to look at with most citizen science schemes, not all, and if there is a scheme that's designed with that in mind, then that's absolutely fine. But a lot of them are much more looking at overall catchment health. And so where you deliberately target, the kind of the highest concentration of pollutants is not necessarily, or not at all, representative of what's going on across the piece. If you can see, and my advice to volunteers has always been, if you can access a sewage discharge and there are visible impacts of pollution, so that might be sewage related litter, ragging, algal growth, sewage fungus, take a photograph, report it to the Environment Agency. That's a much more useful way for the Environment Agency to kind of take that information on board than readings from a meter that they won't really recognise in that instance. Plus, you're more likely to pick up some kind of disease, and they're not nice places to spend your time.
Very comprehensively answered, thank you. Question from Anna here, who's asked, is CaSTCo also benchmarking against EA and water company collected data?
We will be doing some of that. I mean, it's useful to know. So a lot of those trials we're talking about, they'll be doing coincident kind of sampling that will be analysed by lab techniques, either at the EA or at external labs. So there will be a part of that. What I think it's unlikely, particularly with something like phosphorus and phosphate, where the actual reading you get is very dependent on the method, because they all have different abilities to kind of unlock the phosphorus that's bound to particulates and things like that. So what's more probably the way we'll go is try and create or enable consistent data sets within themselves. So a data set collected using one method will point us in various directions about what the issues are, and then compare that with another data set that's collected with its own internal consistency, if you like. So you compare the findings of the data set rather than the actual measurements themselves, because that's very difficult to do using different methods. What we are hoping to do with CaSTCo is kind of understand how those data sets are gathered across the country. So if you have multiple schemes across the country using the same methodology, then yes, we'll be able to compare those observations essentially.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question from Andrew, which Jeff has kindly commented on as well. So he noticed phosphate dosing in drinking water as in your presentation on all those different sources of nutrients. Is phosphate added to drinking water? So Jeff has commented, but just in case not everyone can see, could you just quickly answer that one for Andrew?
Jeff would know better than me, but my understanding is yes, phosphate is added to drinking water, and that's largely so that lead from lead pipes doesn't leach into the drinking water. It's not the case in every location, but it is quite widespread. And when I was at West Country Rivers Trust, if we were asking people to kind of check that their phosphate strips are working, we would often say test them in tap water, because you get quite a positive result. You know, we're talking easily up above 200 parts per billion, which is almost what you need to trigger a positive result on the or 2000 parts per billion, sorry, on the test strips. A nice positive result. It shows the test strip is still active. So yes.
Okay, but hopefully I'm assuming that's not harmful to us drinking that water, at least.
I think
in
it's
those
a lot
kinds of
better for you than the lead.
Yeah, very good point. Another question from Kim, another complex one maybe. Why isn't it obligatory for these industrial organisations and water companies to put a network of real-time monitors in place? I'm assuming that Kim means for sewage discharges. Maybe Kim can elaborate. But certainly, I think for sewage, we are trying to work towards a real-time monitoring system.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting one, and actually, yes, was just talking about it before the conference started today. The new Environment Act does stipulate that water companies will have to put SONs or measuring devices for things like, I mean, not phosphate, because that's quite a complicated one. I don't know if you saw my list. You can measure phosphate in real time, but it takes £15,000 worth of equipment. It's quite difficult, but certainly measuring water quality upstream and downstream of every single CSO and discharge in the country, which is a massive undertaking and has a load of issues with it. But that is what's in the current Environment Act. With agriculture, the problem there is that the pollution tends to be what we call diffuse pollution. So it's not coming from a single point, identifiable point, it's coming from a landscape area. And so quite where you'd put the sensor to measure that impact is undecided. And also up until now, and even now, in deploying these bits of equipment on the scale that we would need to is a massive undertaking. It's quite a technical challenge to get a sensor in a river, with water levels going up and down, raging torrents 1 minute and still water drying out the next. Not that it can't be tackled, but it's not something that has been pushed by government yet or by the Environment Agency yet. Those kind of devices are used much more liberally or much more sparingly in kind of investigating suspected pollution issues.
Brilliant. And then one final question from me, but has also been alluded to in the chat, just linking back to how the data that we'll be collecting through our citizen science initiatives can potentially link to enforcement. You talked about if someone suspects a sewage pollution incident, that the best thing to do is to take that photo, report it to the Environment Agency. we do know that maybe responses to reports of pollution incidents are not as proactive as we would like them to be. So could you just maybe expand a little bit more on that pyramid that you used to explain how we can take that data and actually use it to improve enforcement in this sector?
Absolutely. So I mean, that's still under discussion. The Environment Agency have committed, and I think they wrote a paper probably 10 years ago about their desire to make more use of what they call third-party data. And I think that call for kind of an understanding of the quality, whatever that quality level might be, but some kind of standardization so you can understand the quality, is definitely high up on their wish list. What they've told us so far, so talking to the regional teams who are involved in CaSTCo, is there's definitely a use for volunteer monitoring data to help them target their investigations and their statutory monitoring. So as we see, their monitoring resources dwindled to a fraction of what it was. So looking at volunteer data sets can help them to target the monitoring resource they do have. So if there's a persistent issue, they can collect, their gold standard data on it and do what they need to do with regards to prosecutions. I think the other thing I was going to say was, it's just going out of my head, oh yes, in terms of responding to pollution events and calls in, yes, again, they've been restricted into the level of incidents they will likely respond to it with an in-person visit. But again, our advice from having spoken to those regional and area teams is please do call in all any events you see, because even if they don't follow it up on the first time, if a number of people see it, if it's a problem that's going on over a period of weeks or months, then eventually they will get around to see it. They will find a way of targeting those events. And obviously having that data, having those reports is much more useful than not. So please let's not get used to the idea that rivers are polluted and not reported in. If you report it, if you see it, then report it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's at least you've got that written record in place. There are a few more questions. I'm sorry we won't get to those in the chat, but it is time to move on. And unfortunately, if you think that nutrient pollution, that nutrients are ubiquitous in river environments, then yeah, you might not enjoy this. Well, in a sense, you may not enjoy this presentation that we're going to have on chemicals from the Rivers Trust's Josh Jones. So if Josh, I think you are there, if you can come on camera, and I will hand over to you for your presentation.
Thanks, Becca. Great. You got the slide rather than the notes?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. My worst fear. Morning, everyone. I'm Josh. I'm one of the technical analysts in the data team with Dave, Michelle, and Simon. And this morning I'm going to be talking about forever chemicals. So you may have heard about these quite a bit in the news in the last few months. Sorry, particularly I'm going to be focusing on per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances, otherwise known as PFAS. So you're probably all very familiar with maps like this, detailing that 0% of our rivers meet good chemical status according to the 2019 Water Framework Directive assessment. This chemical status is calculated by assessing 52 different chemical elements, individual and groups of chemicals. Yet, the majority of these reasons for failure are down to 3 substances, and these are polybrominated diphenyl ethers, mercury and its compounds, and a chemical called PFOS, or perfluorooctane sulfonic acid and its derivatives. And because of new standards and improved techniques and improved methods, we've only been able to look for some of these wonderfully named ubiquitous, persistent, bioaccumulative and toxic substances since 2016. So if you looked at the same map in 2016, most water bodies and rivers would be in good chemical status, because we just couldn't see these chemicals because we didn't have the right assay techniques in place. But helpfully, Natural England have painted a nice rosy picture that without these ubiquitous, persistent, bioaccumulative and toxic substances in their state of the water environment indicator, 93% of rivers would achieve good chemical status. And even better, 100% of lakes and estuaries and coastal waters will all be achieving good chemical status. But I think that's rather optimistic, given that we know that they've got some quite nasty impacts on health. So I'm going to focus on PFAS, and also known as forever chemicals. They're a group of synthetic chemicals with the full title of per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances. There are more than 4,700 of them in wide use. As I said, they're persistent and they can remain in the environment for an unknown length of time. They're bioaccumulative in people, where people and wildlife absorb PFAS faster than they can be eliminated from the body. And there's also evidence of harmful effects in people and wildlife, with links to cancer, fecal complications, liver disease, kidney disease, autoimmune disorders, among many other serious impacts on our health. And this is a schematic in case you've got to keep your eyes peeled if you could ever see things in their chemical structure. So this is the structure of PFOS. So why are there PFAS chemicals found in the environment? Well, that's simply because we use them in everything. PFAS are typically used to make thousands of consumer products resistant to water, staining, and heat. So they're used in your paper and cardboard food packaging, so they can end up in your takeaway because they leach out of the packaging into the food. They're used in non-stick cookware and textiles, so they're in your Gore-Tex jacket, and they're in the flame retardants used in your carpet and the mattress you sleep on. They're used in all sorts of cosmetics. They're really important in smartphones, but also in solar panels. They're sprayed around liberally in firefighting foams. They occur in lots of different agricultural products. And recently, a study came out where 21 major toilet paper brands were assayed for the PFAS chemicals, and every single brand that they looked at contained these forever chemicals. And it's not necessarily because these chemicals are put in to improve their water resistance or their resistance to stains. It's because they're used as a lubricant in the machinery that makes the toilet paper. So they really are ubiquitous. But unfortunately, we don't know enough about them at the moment. In the UK, we only monitor the PFOS under the Water Framework Directive. Although we do have we do know concentrations of other chemicals. The only one that's really monitored for under the Water Framework Directive is PFOS. And concentrations in freshwater and biota are compared to an environmental quality standard, which I might refer to later as an EQS. So the existing EQS in PFOS and the UK Water Framework Directive is quite low in that first small table, but there are concerns that there are many more PFAS chemicals in production, and when, if not, they escape into the environment, they're likely to persist and bioaccumulate. Evidence suggests that this can lead to additive effects. In response to this, the EU has proposed a new set of quality standards based on a sum of 24 different PFAS substances. And if you compare the values in those two tables, you can see that even when the EU's new proposed standard is considering 24 different compounds, their concentrations they're looking for in freshwater is not much stringent, and actually the concentration they're looking for in biota or samples of fish tissue is actually many times lower than the current UK standards for PFOS alone. And it's not just Europe that the UK is lagging behind on. In England and Wales, the Drinking Water Inspectorate's guidelines allow levels of PFOS and another lovely chemical with the name PFOA in drinking water is 25 times higher than the standard set in the United States. So maybe we know something everyone else doesn't, but I doubt it. So looking at in some Environment Agency data, there's several data sets. There's one that uses liquid chromatography mass spectrometry, and there's a gas chromatography mass spectrometry, and also the water quality archive that Simon mentioned earlier. These PFAS chemicals, well, so we looked for this list of 24 that the new EU standard is going to regulate against. So we looked for those, and we found up to 10 of them in 102 different river sampling sites. And by comparing these sites against and their concentrations against the new EU standards, 78% of them would fail to meet the proposed EU standard. 40% of them would exceed the new standard by 5 times, and 15% of the sites exceeded the standard by more than 10 times. And actually, the river roading in 2019, there were 10 PFAS compounds detected, and their combined concentration exceeded the European Environmental Quality Standard by 22 times. So they really are just being sprayed around. And it's not just in the water that we're detecting PFAS here, there, and everywhere. On the left, this is concentrations of PFOS, because that's the only one that we look for in the WFD Water Framework Directive in the UK. Concentrations of PFOS, again, as compared to the UK's quality standard. And on the right, it is PFOS compared to the proposed European biota quality standard. And it's really important here to note the change in the scale between these two graphs. On the left-hand side in the UK map, less than 1%, less than 65%, about 75% of sites are less than 1 times greater than the quality standard. But when using the EU quality standard, which is 0.077 micrograms per kilogram, as opposed to 9.1 micrograms per kilogram in the UK, the lowest exceedance of the quality standard is 10 times the European standard, and the highest median or the highest average measured concentration of PFOS was reported in the River Frome in Bristol, and that was just over 40 micrograms per kilogram. And after applying a relative potency factor that, which is derived from the chemical I mentioned before, PFOA, because PFOS is considered to be twice as potent as PFOA. And this gives a comparable result of 81 micrograms per kilogram, which exceeds the EU quality standard by more than 1,000 times. So there's no wonder our rivers are already failing chemical status, and why sometimes other restoration methods might struggle. So what can we do about it? As always, we need to push policymakers. The government has got a chemical strategy, and we need to push for that to phase out most harmful chemicals, but also to take on a precautionary principle. So because every time we find out about a new compound, turns out it's really nasty, so we should take the approach that they're probably all quite nasty. The government has is preparing to ban the use of some PFAS, for instance, in firefighting foams, but really we need the ban of all non-essential uses. And this is in their regulatory management option assessment. Lovely title, and so look out for that if you want to put some pressure on the part of government responsible for that. And it's also really important that we keep up with other countries and regions like the EU who are actually putting in much stronger regulations on these chemicals, and make sure that our list of priority substances that I mentioned in the first slide keeps track with the EU's list, which is being extended with even tougher standards for PFAS. And also, it's important that we pick up any analysis that's being done on these chemicals in your area, so to really push the message home. A point that will be made again and again and again is to ask for better monitoring, especially for these emerging substances that we don't know very much about yet, because they could be even more harmful than the ones we've already regulated. And also to continue, does that just kill my presentation? Yeah. To continue raising awareness through all sorts of channels, particularly sustainable use of these chemicals at home and in your garden, continued wider communication, and also promoting and working with farmers for more sustainable use of these persistent chemicals in agriculture. That's me, and also thanks to Annika and Rob, who have done a lot of this work alongside me with Link Chemicals Trust. So Link Wildlife and Countryside Link. That's me.
Brilliant, thanks Josh. We've already got questions flying in. My first one is about these chemical compounds and substances. Clearly at the moment in regulation that they tend to be addressed individually, but presumably, or is it the case that they will react together when they're out in the environment, and does that compound their impact?
Yeah, so
if they're combining.
There's a piece of work I've just finished and sent off to Wildlife and Countryside Link, I managed to say it correctly that time, where we looked for known combinations in the literature where these chemicals, where this combination had a more deleterious or a higher impact than just the compounds on their own. And there's lots of interaction between, say, the PFAS and the PFOA, the ones we already know are bad, but there's also interaction between PFOA and ibuprofen, and you can buy ibuprofen over the counter. So there's ibuprofen occurs in nearly every river you look in the UK, and a skim through the data shows that there's over 1,500 sites where these known combinations occur. So yeah,
Oh, okay,
Just
yeah.
a iceberg.
Yeah, I think that links back to one of the comments in the chat, which was maybe the most accurate comment I've seen the whole event, which was just OMG scary. Quite accurate, I think. But yeah, we've got more questions here. Luca has just asked for a bit of clarification on how the two sets of standards compare. He says, given that one, I think, refers to PFOS and one to PFAS. So I think that is meaning the EU standards and the proposed ones in the UK that you were talking about?
Yeah, so the EU, the new proposed EU standard looks at 24 different chemicals, but at the moment we don't consider more than PFOS in the UK. So and also the EU in including those additional 23 chemicals uses a relative potency factor to make it equivalent to these other two PFOS. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So next, Ed has just asked, what chemical properties do PFAS have that make them so valuable to industry? You talked about this, sometimes, was it the toilet paper example, where it's in the machines that actually manufacture it? So if you could maybe just expand on some more examples of that.
So they're used as lubricants, Ed, in the machinery. And I'm not too certain on what they're used for in photovoltaics, but I did read a quote from when I was reading about like an EU-wide ban, because I think Denmark and other Scandinavian countries is bringing a complete ban on these substances, or at least a lot more than other European states. And the pushback was from people in the renewable energy sector, particularly in photovoltaic manufacturers, saying that if you want a green revolution, we need some of these chemicals. So a complete blanket ban won't help.
Yeah, which is why we're talking about phasing out non-essential use in recommendations for our chemical strategy. Okay, brilliant. Jeff has said the effects of PFOS and other chemicals on environmental and or human health do often get described as scary, including by me 2 minutes ago. But they do also have positives, like we've just talked about, among some examples. So given that we do generally have limited resources in the Environment Agency, etc., how do we decide where best to focus our efforts? Because yeah, ideally it would be on almost everything.
Yes, so ideally it would be. One, we have to go with the scientific literature to tell us which ones are the worst ones, because that is one thing that science does well, is that has time to drill down to the specifics of different chemicals. But in terms of monitoring, it's looking, as well as looking everywhere, which there has been. That's what has been done for WFD, because every water body has had some sort of chemical sampling. It's also more targeted sampling. So there is the UK water industry data set, which actually has a lot more detail in it, and it looks upstream and downstream of wastewater treatment plants. But you could also target this sampling near sites of manufacture. So for instance, we're talking to the Wyre Rivers Trust about possibly doing some sampling of fish in the Wyre and in the estuary, because there are manufacturing processes in the Wyre that use PFAS.
Brilliant, thank you. A question from Tony, who said, I keep hearing this term chemicals of emerging interest. So could you just clarify what that means? Are they new chemicals or chemicals that just haven't really been maybe investigated before?
Yeah, so they're not new. Sometimes someone will come up with a novel one, and it will get used, or there'll be an impact assessment of whether it's safe to use it or not, and they might miss a few things. But quite often it is things we've been using for years and years and years, and we didn't think to look. So one example is PFBs, which were used in transformers, lots of other things, and they are now, we've only in the last maybe 10 years started discovering them in orca, and they bioaccumulate in orca, and it accumulates in the mother's breast milk, which means that they quite often can't feed their calves because the calves drink the breast milk, but it's full of chemicals. So they're often ones we didn't know had an impact before, we just hadn't looked.
Yeah, which brings us back to that precautionary principle, which I'm really glad you mentioned. Brilliant. Moving on, Bob has said these compounds are persistent, bioaccumulative and toxic, so surely they should already be heavily regulated or banned outright under existing REACH regulation, so that's EU chemicals regulation. Is that not effective here? It's quite complex, isn't it?
No, it's not. It is. Yeah, it's not. I was looking at the table earlier, Bob, and no, they're not. They might be listed as what they're called substances of very high concern, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we stop using them. And actually, what has happened is that a lot of these, so some of these ones we have regulated have been regulated really well in the UK and Europe and sometimes the US. What that has meant is that manufacturer that uses or depends on those compounds has moved to Asia, and then we use those products. So they end up kind of getting into the back door.
Well, yeah, that's a really important point, and I suppose speaks even more to the importance of international collaboration over this, because if it's part of our supply chain, then we are still having that impact on the environment. Okay, let's see, a few more questions. I think we can fit in a couple more. Kenneth has said, do you check data from the Cardiff Otter project on PFAS? The study led by Cardiff University's Otter project analysed historical data and found, oh gosh, I can't pronounce these things, perfluoralkyl and, well, PFASs, which have been linked to health problems in both humans and wildlife in Eurasian otters. Are you aware of that study? Do you have any comment?
That's a really easy one, Kenneth. We're about to get that data. Cardiff University is kindly about to hand it to us, along with the data I mentioned on orca and other cetaceans.
Brilliant. Okay, so maybe we'll fit in all of these questions. Kate says, we have a 20 megawatt lithium ion battery storage being installed next to the source of the River Loddon chalk stream. What evidence can you point me to explain the hazard should thermal runaway happen?
I'm not I'm not a chemist, and I'm not particularly sure what thermal runaway means. Is it a bit like a nuclear reactor meltdown? Kate, maybe you could educate me in the chat.
Yeah, or maybe get in touch with us via info@Rivers Trust or something, and we'll see if we can help any more with that. I'm going to take the final question from the Q&A here from Stephen, who said Stephen is a Lib Dem member, and he said the Conservative government is proposing to reduce standards via the retained EU Law Act. Are you able to comment? I think all I will say is that we have commented publicly on the potential impacts of the retained EU law bill before, and obviously we would be pretty much against anything that weakens protection for the environment on that. Josh, I know that's a bit less your area of working, but if you did want to comment, then feel free now.
Thanks for covering, Becca. I didn't want to put my foot in it. Well, you can see from the data that we're already miles and miles and miles behind, or we're about very soon to be miles behind. So going even further backwards would just be a disaster. Yeah,
it's clearly going to be a very important and potentially very impactful piece of legislation. So we just hope that it will be studied carefully to make sure that nothing is missed, to keep even the current environmental protections that we do have in place. And I think that Mark Lloyd, our Chief Executive, is still on the call, so hopefully I haven't made any missteps there with those comments, and maybe Mark wants to comment further. But as I say, we've made comment about that publicly before. I'll bring the morning session to a close now. All right, welcome back everyone. Hopefully you are feeling refreshed and rejuvenated and not too despondent after that reality check on river pollution. Next up, we have obviously hinted about talking about citizen science earlier in today's session. So now we're going to delve a bit deeper into that with a case study from the Bristol Avon catchment. So I'm going to bring Simon Hunter and Tim Culmer up to the virtual stage to join me in just a second. And they are going to be able to talk about that work that's been going on in their catchment. Hopefully just, here we are, Simon. Sorry, I was a bit late leaving you in there, but I'll just wait for Tim to come in. And we can take it away.
Hi, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rebecca. I think I'm just going to hold on for Tim to try and share the slides, so we're not to and fro-ing. Hopefully technology helps. There we go, fantastic. Yes, so thanks, Rebecca, and thanks for the introduction, and thank you for having us. Sorry, was I muted then? Do I need to start again? I was just saying thank you very much, Rebecca, for introducing us and for having us at the conference to talk about championing citizen science in the Bristol Avon. So as a quick intro, I'm Simon Hunter. I'm the Chief Exec of Bristol Avon Rivers Trust, and I'm joined today by Tim Culmer, who is the Environmental and Geospatial Solutions Capability Lead at RiskAware.
Yep.
So if we pop on to the next slide.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to touch on really is just to state that rivers are our lifeblood. You know, fresh water is the lifeblood of our planet, and we all need fresh water to survive. When rivers, lakes and wetlands are degraded, their ability to provide reliable supplies of clean water and to support the species on which millions of people depend on is threatened. So the state of our rivers, we know from previous presentations, and I'm sure all of you are aware from the press and the media at the moment, that our rivers are not in good health. And across the UK, just 14% of our rivers achieve good status, good ecological status under the Water Framework Directive. In the Bristol Avon, we're below that average and we're just at 12%. And obviously the UK's government target is to achieve good status by 2027. So there's a long way to go. And based on the data that has been collected, and again, touching on some of the earlier presentations, it's historic data with regulatory sampling now becoming reduced. There's less data being collected. So actually finding meaningful up-to-date data is really quite limited, particularly in our catchment that we're finding at the moment. So what are we trying to do about it? Well, locally, BART is eager to promote and support citizen science as a means of gathering data, as well as raising awareness of the issues and how we all work together to make an impact to improve the health of our rivers. Working with the community via citizen science enables us to engage communities about the issues based on data that they actually collect, as well as introduce them and to propose solutions. And we can explain what this is. We can explain terms like nature-based solutions and show them how, you know, joining up and delivering at scale can help improve water quality. It also helps making turning up to site with diggers and dumpers to implement projects on the ground a lot easier once you've got a community that is well engaged with some of the problems locally, and they're more forthcoming to that change at a landscape scale. Regarding citizen science, there's a number of work streams that we currently run at BART, and through citizen science, we collected a wide range of data from a number of sources and with various techniques. This has helped us over time enhance our localized understanding of the environment in which we live, and allowing us to share some of this data with our partners and share ownership of solutions. The programmes frequently produce excellent primary research while demonstrating the critical significance of community participation in complicated issues such as water quality. On the right-hand side there, that's a tributary of the Bristol Froome from last year. We've seen it run pretty much every colour of the rainbow over the last sort of several years. So again, that's an industrial pollution, and through some of our citizen science work, we've highlighted where the pollution source is occurring, and we've engaged those businesses. We've worked with our partners such as the water industry and the Environment Agency to make better these issues. I won't touch on too many details of the individual citizen science programmes that you can see on the screen, but we will be focusing this talk around the top two. So we've got the Bristol River Blitz and the Bart River Detectives, and those two I'd like to unpack a little bit and explain how we've grown those projects over time and how we hope to continue growing them and using them to influence change on the ground. The Bristol River Blitz, it's a fantastic annual event that's coordinated by BART. We ran it since 2016, and the aim is to collect widespread water quality data over a period of 5 days. We use a low-cost nutrient monitoring sampling program where we look at nitrates and phosphates, again, touching on some of the work that Simon Browning mentioned earlier, so I won't go into the details of the kits that we use. But essentially what we're trying to do is provide a snapshot each year of what our rivers look like in summer. In healthy rivers, of course, nutrients occur naturally in small amounts and are crucial for the growth of aquatic plants and animals. But we know that too many nutrients entering our watercourses can be a problem for both the aquatic ecosystems and for us. Nitrates and phosphates are nutrients that enter watercourses through an array of different ways. You've got fertilizers, manure, we've got sewage, we've got waste, urban runoff. We've also got household products such as washing detergents. All of those can contribute these nutrients into our watercourses. The problem is once we have them in our watercourses, they can speed up plant growth and they can cause eutrophication, and in extreme cases can cause harmful algal blooms. And we've seen a lot of that starting to happen in our local catchments, along with algae and diatoms, which have begun to smother riverbed habitats and actually have an implication to the freshwater ecosystem. Algal blooms obviously are bad because they limit the light and the oxygen levels in the watercourse, which reduces the availability to aquatic organisms and essentially limits life within our watercourses. So we've got over 1,000 measurements, I think, across our catchment over that 7-year period, and we're looking to increase participation year on year. And we're now moving into a new year, and in July we have our Bristol River Blitz 2023. So if we move on to the next one. So how does it help? Well, it gets people out and engaging with their local blue and green spaces. It increases the awareness about the problems that our rivers face, and it provides a snapshot of data from across the whole catchment. It helps us prioritise where our conservation efforts are required, and it also helps conversation with our partners through the Catchment Partnership to decide through evidence where we can make the most impact. However, growing this programme has created and generated huge amounts of data, and each year we're growing that data. I mean, for instance, last year through the River Blitz, I think we had over 200 volunteers, over 450 samples taken across the catchment. So what we wanted to do was to try and illustrate and visualise that data in an effective way so that we can create a user-friendly dashboard that encapsulates, visualises and analyses trends across the catchment and streamline the methodology for collecting that data as well. So that's where we've began sort of our discussions with Risk Aware, and I'm going to pass over to Tim, who's going to talk about how we've worked in partnership to take the vital data that we're collecting through citizen science and create a visual tool that has enabled us to visualize and analyze this data at scale. So Tim, over to you.
Hi everyone. So yeah, as Simon says, I work for Riskware, and we're a small little software consultancy based down in Bristol. And so BART are our local rivers trust. And so my first involvement with the River Blitz was actually as a volunteer. I signed up for a couple of kits and headed off down to Pigeon House Stream to take some samples. And I got to chatting to Simon about how, about the project and what the current limitations at that point were. And between us, we kind of came up with this idea of a data platform. And so we've worked very closely with BART to develop this for the River Blitz project. And the platform consists of a public site, so that's where the volunteers can sign up, and that's where all the data can be viewed. And we also have an admin site, which is for the BART team to coordinate the project. So it's kind of two parts. You've got the data visualization, but also streamlining the whole approach to the project and trying to reduce some of that overhead on BART's team. So I'm going to touch on a few things about the platform, but the best way for you to try this out is to actually go to the URL there and actually try it out for yourselves. It's a web-based system, so there's no apps to install or anything like that, and it works on phones, tablets, everything. So no excuses for not trying it out. So how does the platform work, and how does it help BART run the project? So initially, the public site and the admin site work together to kind of coordinate the whole thing. So volunteers can register, they agree to the terms and conditions of the project, and they can choose whether they want the samples to be sent to sample kits to be sent to them in person, over the post, or collect them at the events. And then this diagram here kind of illustrates like the flow then starting at that point. So BART their team then use the admin site to see who signed up, where they need to send the kits. Then the kits are received by the volunteers, they head out to their rivers, they take their samples, and they use the public site to enter their results. And those results can then be approved by BART, they can check them, and that helps to ensure that the quality of the data recorded is as high as possible. And it also, the site can allow BART to check up on volunteers who maybe haven't submitted their results yet and chase up and make sure they get as much data from the project as possible. And then finally, when the data's approved, it ends up in the Data Explorer, which is publicly accessible and helps visualize the data. And I think one of the things that perhaps isn't talked about with data visualization is it's really important for the volunteers to be able to see their data, because I think it helps them motivate them, and it's going to mean that they want to take part next year because they can actually go and see the data they've collected. So a bit of a deeper dive into the Data Explorer then so you see the screenshot on the left there. That's how the Explorer starts up. So you see the whole of BART's catchment, and you can see that they've managed to gather. The volunteers have gathered data across the whole catchment, which is really great. And then we've put a big focus on the Data Explorer to try and help people understand the data. So I don't know what 0.2 milligrams per litre of phosphate in a river means. So we've tried to convert that into sort of understandable things like thresholds, so like high, medium, and low. And really try and help put that data into context, but without trying to put a bias or telling a particular story on that data. And then to help further with this, you can see in the second screenshot, we've got some information pages that are also included on the site to give background to the project. And we've got an FAQs page there as well, which we keep up to date with any questions that the volunteers or the users of the Data Explorer have. A couple more screenshots and some features that the Data Explorer has. So one of its unique features is we actually project the data that the volunteers have collected onto the river systems themselves. So we use Ordnance Survey open river data to do that. And you can see in that screenshot there, hopefully if your eyes are good enough, you can see that the user has clicked on a particular segment of river, and you can see all of the measurements that relate to that particular segment. And so as well as trying to give easy access to all the data with the Data Explorer, we've also tried to just make it fun to use. I think the River Blitz, one of the big goals of it is to increase public awareness and public engagement with our river systems. So actually making it fun to use is really important. And we've used lots of different visualization techniques, things like photographs, charts. In that screenshot there, you can kind of see how the data has changed over the years and things like that. So all really good stuff. So I'm going to hand back to Simon now, who's going to talk about another citizen science project that we worked on with them, which is the River Detectives.
Yes, thank you, Tim. Yeah, building on the success of our annual River Blitz, we wanted to do a little bit more based on demand from community, but also knowing how much interest there was in our citizen science programme. So this year we've started what we call our River Detectives programme. It's a monthly water quality sampling programme, and it's based on training volunteers from local communities to undertake regular monthly water quality monitoring across several subcatchments. So it's in its pilot phase at the moment. And this includes collecting a little bit more comprehensive data, looking at sort of temperature, dissolved solids, turbidity. We've also got phosphate, of course. And then we look at invasive species. And what we can do with the methodology that we've created is also create a photographic record database as well. So our volunteers are out there recording this data on an online portal that, again, we'll touch on the details in a minute. And that allows us to create a really comprehensive analysis of each site every single month. I think that the important thing to mention is that we've collaborated with a number of organisations to get to this phase. So again, we've worked with our local water industry, we've worked with our local authorities and the Bristol Avon Catchment Partnership, who have contributed towards the funding and support of the development of this programme. So we haven't done it in silo. We've done it based on the fact that we have a demand and we don't know a lot about some of our watercourses due to the lack of statutory monitoring. So it's something that we've had that multi-partner buy-in for. So we're at this exciting phase now where we're trialling it with the overarching aim of proof of concept and then rolling it out Bristol Avon wide. So I'm going to probably pass you back now, I think, to Tim, who's got a bit of a demo to show the viewers of how this platform works.
Thanks, Simon. So the nature of the River Detectives project means that the platform that we've built to support it is slightly different from the River Blitz one, but it's still based on the same core functionality and principles, with the admin and public sites kind of performing similar roles. But the visualization that we've produced for the project really capitalize on that extra data that the volunteers are capturing, both in terms of frequency, but also the range of readings that they're taking. And again, the site is hosted on BART's website, so I'd encourage you all to go and check it out. So I've got a bit of a video now. If anyone has trouble viewing this video, then I will also post a link to the YouTube video as well. So it's going to take us through some of the features and how the platform we developed for River Detectives works. So this is starts with the admin site. So this is where BART's team used to coordinate the whole system. And you can see a list of sites that they've created for their volunteers to go and monitor. All the data here is just demonstrative, and they're not real users. So yeah, this is showing you how to create a site. So you give it a name, and then it's as simple as kind of clicking on a map as to choose where you want that to appear. And then you enter the information about the volunteer that's going to go and monitor that site. And then once you have that, you can generate a link that you can send out to the volunteer, and that will take them to a page that looks like this, where they can enter the data for their site. So they record photos, what the rain was in the last 24 hours, any wildlife sightings, characteristics of the surrounding area, non-native species, evidence of pollution, so a whole load of things, and including the data that they'll get with their sampling kits as well. So once that data's been recorded, BART's team can then go and review the data, similar to the River Blitz. They can go and review it and make sure it's of the highest quality. Once it's approved, it goes into the Data Explorer, which you'll see now. So this is how the Data Explorer looks, and this is available publicly. And those dots on the map represents the different sites that the volunteers are monitoring. And we can go through and we can color the sites depending on the values of the different fields that the volunteers are recording. So then it's also possible to filter that data, so we can filter it by region. So here we're going to zoom in on the Bristol Froome subcatchment. And we can also filter by date, so we can go back and look at historic dates. So we're seeing how the phosphate levels have changed at the sites over time. And then, like I said, with with the extra frequency of the data, it's also possible to do more comparisons. So here we're selecting a couple of sites that we want to take a closer look at and actually compare. In this, you can select as many sites as you like. So here we're seeing on the chart the different readings that have been taken at those sites over time. And then also on the chart, the measurements, the data points on the chart represent particular measurements. And so you can select them to view them in more detail in the table below. And you can see all the information that the volunteers have gathered. And then to make the site as accessible as possible, we've also got an introductory tour for new users that you can see here that kind of takes them through the various features. Great. So yeah, like I say, I'll share the YouTube link for that video in case anyone had trouble seeing it. And I'll hand back now to Simon, who's going to take us through the future of these citizen science projects and some new ones as well.
Great, thank you, Tim. And it's just worth mentioning that this has taken a number of years to get to where we are, and it's been incredibly tough, I think, from a small trust trying to secure the funding to enable all of this to happen and align. But I think we've got there, and we've got this package now that we're scratching the surface of its capability. So for us as a next step, we're collaborating at the moment with different partners, local partners, to investigate the possibilities to expand the BART Detectives programme across the Bristol Avon. We intend to expand the project in collaboration with a variety of organisations and interest groups. So again, part of that package would be helping to streamline what methodology we use, so we're consistent across organisations collecting that data, and then allowing other organisations to report data into this sort of central database. That's the plan, that's where we'd like to get to. We'd also like to upload wider data sets that we've collected through citizen science. So we are the Army, the Riverfly monitoring coordinator for the Bristol Avon. We've got over 70 volunteers collecting monthly data across our rivers and streams. It backdates from, I think, around 2012. So we've got a wealth of data there that we could pull into this tool as another water quality indicator that again helps us use citizen science in a collaborative way. We're also adopting a partnership approach, and I mentioned it earlier, but I think it's key to get the key partners involved in the development phase of this so that it works for them. If we can create an opportunity where we've got the Environment Agency, we've got the water industry, we've got other key partners within our catchment partnership buying into this methodology, then it gives us a level of data that we can have that conversation about, and we can look at that data and compare it to some of the other data sets that other organisations collect as well. In our patch, there's a lot of water quality sampling being done around sort of bathing water sites, and again, it's a conversation we're having with the water industry at the moment. How can we perhaps integrate some of that monitoring into a central hub where we can compare the various data sets being collected by the water industry as well as the ENGOs and community groups too. So essentially, I think that is wrapped up. It's been a rather whirlwind tour of our citizen science packages, but one final point just to say is that this data as well, the end game would be to use it for conversation to then instigate change on the ground, and that's what we're starting to do now. So we're working in collaboration with those partners. We're beginning to target some of the areas where we're finding these hotspots for pollution, and then we're intervening with nature-based solutions, with campaigns, visiting industrial units where we know some of the sources of these pollutions are coming from, and working with the water industry as well in some of these high priority areas. Thanks, Tim. If you move on to the next one. So thank you all for listening, and yeah, look forward to your questions.
Brilliant, thank you both. I'm just going to stop screen sharing so people can continue to send in their questions. One thing that was really nice is that just as you were starting, someone asked about the makeup of the audience and who's coming from where. And lots of people have spoken up and said that they are volunteers or they're from NGOs that obviously would work with a lot of volunteers. So hopefully everyone's finding this really relevant and informative. I'm just going to go straight into the questions. So the first one is from Stephen. I think this was quite near the start of the presentation that this came in. Stephen said, Simon, I thought that the solution for the eradication of mink was the introduction of otters that eat them. Please advise. I don't know whether that's anything to do with just some complexities around otter reintroductions.
Yeah, well, it's a good point. I think, you know, otters have been known to predate mink. But I think in our catchment in particular, there are areas where, you know, we've got really isolated populations of water vole and they're dwindling. But we know the presence of mink is far outcompeted other species such as otter, where we know they also exist. So our programme is starting to understand again where mink are most present. And then if we're thinking about, you know, eradication and looking at ways that we can dispatch, this citizen science approach has been incredibly helpful. Also linked to that, we're also picking up where we've got otters. So we've got trail cams out alongside our rafts. We're seeing, you know, birds, kingfishers, all sorts of other wildlife that again gets reported through potentially a portal or a data set like we've created. So yeah, I understand the question, but I think also in this case, human intervention might be required to eliminate the high populations of mink that we're experiencing.
Brilliant, thank you. This other question from Vivian is slightly more geared towards Josh's presentation, and I think Josh has had to go and do other things. But it's about, well, Vivian said, is there a first port of call for individuals to help decrease chemicals or plastic microparticles leaking into the environment alongside better consumer choices? For example, are washing machine filters effective? Quick comment on that maybe from me is that consumer choices for individuals probably is one of the most powerful things. Voting with your wallet, switching to plant-based household products, for instance, if that happens on a large scale, that can make a big difference. The washing machine filters example, I believe there was a bill going through certain stages of Parliament at some point, maybe about 18 months ago, but I just don't know whether that actually made it through. So yeah, just trying to answer that one that was kind of more geared towards Josh there. But if Simon, you did have anything to say on that, then please go ahead.
Not particularly, not my specialism, but I agree with the points that you've made there, Rebecca, but probably one for Josh.
Yeah, or maybe someone else in the chat. We've got lots of people who do know about various things on here. So Debbie has said, back to the citizen science, great engagement on the River Blitz with over 200 volunteers. How did you get the word out?
I think various channels of social media in the early days, I must admit in 2016, when we rolled this out for the first time, we worked in partnership with Freshwater Watch, and I think it was about 30 volunteers, and we were chuffed. You know, that was great. People, you know, were participating. But I think through our BART beacons, so we've also got a sort of a non-committal volunteer force who are our eyes and ears on the ground, again channeling the project to those people, enabled over the years for it to grow. And eventually where we are now, as I said, we've been developing these programs in partnerships, and through working with the local authorities, working with other organizations that have perhaps a larger outreach than ourselves, we've been able to spread the word more quickly. We've also been doing a lot of work with Patagonia. So again, they're based in Bristol. Again, they've been brilliant at sort of advertising our events. We've had store events as well, where we've gone and we've spoken about the projects and we've given out kits. So again, everyone's played their part, but social media for us has been a huge driver for numbers, and certainly diversifying the age groups of volunteers working on the project as well. So we've got this whole array of different people from different backgrounds getting involved, which is brilliant, which is really what the end point of the project is all about.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Let's see, we've just had a bit of an influx of questions and it is 12:30. So I think I'm just going to have to maybe combine them. We've got one question about what software or platform you use, because it looks quite versatile, and another one about which test kits you use and where you source them. So maybe if we could just get a really quick fire answer to those ones before we move on.
Yeah, sure. Tim, do you want to jump in first?
Yes, so the software platform is something that Riskware has created. So it's designed to work for the projects that BART are doing, but we see it, you know, we've designed it with in mind to be versatile enough to do other data as well.
Yeah,
So yeah,
brilliant.
if you're interested in using it for other things, then definitely get in touch.
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of interest across the audience on how these things can be transferred to their own regions and catchments. We are going to have to move on because we're just running ever so slightly behind. There are another couple of questions in the Q&A. If you do get a chance, Simon and Tim, to maybe type answers to those, that would be fantastic. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to segue straight on and go to our next half-hour session that's going to take us to lunch, where we've got two different presentations, both about plastic pollution initiatives, preventing plastic pollution initiatives. So we're going to take two presentations and then have a Q&A session after both of those. So if I can ask John and Hannah to please come on and go straight into your presentation when you're ready. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Morning, everybody. So Hannah and I are going to be doing a presentation on the plastic-free Mersey project. If Hannah can share her slides, that'd be great.
We're seeing the slides, John. Can you not see them?
Okay, I'm not seeing them for some reason. Well, it should be. I can't
Maybe if Hannah
slides
stops sharing and starts again, perhaps. Any luck, John?
Yep, my Zoom decided to crash out and come back in again. So, but I can now see the slides. So,
okay, brilliant.
Apologies
Take
for
it
that,
away.
everybody. Yes, like this is a collaborative project between Mersey Rivers Trust and Thames 21, building on work that Thames 21 initiated on the River Thames previously. And it's really about an innovative approach to working with partnerships, both private and public, to tackle the issue of plastic pollution, focusing on macroplastics in the River Mersey. So next slide, please. So this is a collaborative project. We think it's quite innovative in the respect that we're working with plastic producers, plastic recyclers, and also the public sector in terms of local authorities. And you can see there the project funders lined up as Innovin, Peel Natural Authority organisation working for Greater Manchester Authority, also working with Plastics Europe and the British Plastics Federation, and also the Recoup organisation. And you can see there the project aims on the screen. Obviously, we're trying to reduce the amount of plastic litter entering our rivers. We're also trying to work with citizen science to understand the different types of litter that we find in our rivers, its prevalence and its sources, and using that data and evidence to implement effective solutions and to work in terms of advocacy and providing evidence to support things like the ban on plastic wet wipe and travel of those initiatives. So the project launched in July 2021, and we've been collecting data through our volunteer citizen scientists since November 2021. So just over a year and a bit now into the project in terms of data collection. Next slide, please. So we're working across the whole of the Mersey Basin, which covers a large area of Greater Manchester, Cheshire and Merseyside, so including the conurbations of Manchester and Liverpool, which you can see on the left-hand side. It's got roughly about 4,000 kilometres square of catchment. And on the right-hand side, you can see a map of the various survey sites that we have citizen scientists trained up to carry out plastic surveys on a monthly basis over now over 12 months of data being collected. So a monthly survey being carried out at those different sites. The black sites are where we have detailed assessments being carried out on 60 metre squared transects. So we do 2 60 metre squared transect per survey site, and counting all the litter and categorising it safe to access the river as close as we can on the other sites. And so these are walking routes where the volunteer walks for 5 minutes, stops, surveys and counts the amount of litter they find within a small radius of where they're standing, and then moves on to another site. So you can see there we're trying to cover the whole of the catchment with different sites from both rural and urban, upland and lowland, to try and get a good representation of the catchment as a whole. Moving on. So I'm going to. So as I said, we've trained over 20 citizen scientists to carry out this work at these different survey sites. And we've got 3 tiers of surveys. We have a visual assessment of litter abundance to start with, just to understand the generality of the litter problem. Then we have a tier 2 walking survey, which is what I just described, with the 5-minute walking. And then thirdly, we have a detailed assessment for which is the bulk of our survey sites, which are 60 metre squared sample sections. And you can see a picture on the right-hand side of a survey section on a river on the River Irwell in Salford, where the volunteer counts within that 60 metre squared all the litter they find against the different categories. And Hannah will move on to explain some of those litter categories shortly. So Hannah, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to take you through some of the findings that we have from the data so far. So our citizen scientists have analysed over 5,500 individual pieces of litter so far, and also looked and recorded out plastic fragments as well, just so we get a kind of idea of what is there on the smaller side of plastic items as well. So these are the top items that we're finding so far. So we split our litter item categories down a bit further, so into plastic, such as plastic bottles, and then items that can contain plastic, so that would include wet wipes within the sanitary items, mixed materials like Tetra Paks, and then non-plastic items as well. So we can see the glass and paper making it to the top 10 of what we're finding, and the other items that we survey are things like metal and rubber as well. So our top sort of categories that we are finding very consistent with other surveys and other sort of studies across the country and amongst Europe. And this is also consistent with like citizen science initiatives like Literati with their app, where people can photograph and record their litter items. And the top 5 are very consistently found across a lot of the sites and make up 59% of what we're finding. We also ask our citizen scientists to record whether or not there are bins nearby to their site. And this has been quite interesting because a lot of the areas without bins have seen a lot higher number of litter items present. This is particularly in certain areas such as at our site on the Weaver. We've had areas that the volunteers describe as lots of benches and often used for picnics. They find a lot of plastic food packaging, but there's absolutely no bins nearby. So this could be something that we can investigate with the local authorities a bit more and get a clearer picture of what can be improved. We also had one particular site along the River Irk where we saw a really high prevalence of sanitary items, particularly wet wipes. And as you can see from the graph, this was way more than we saw in any of the other rivers that are surveyed. So the volunteer comments that they can add to every survey really helped us to understand what was going on here. So he described how there was a lot of wet wipes at the site and how they're almost like amalgamated into the riverbank itself and often frozen in over the winter and hard to get out. And so we used the Rivers Trust map to have a look at the storm overflow occurrences across all of the rivers that link through to our sites and see what's going on upstream of these sites. And the site on the River Irk that we surveyed here was one of the sites that had absolutely really high levels that have been released, as we can see 2,242 hours for 2022, which is when most of the data was collected. So we have quite a confident link here, and definitely again something that we can look at, both obviously as a massive discussion nationally, but also on this local level as well. So moving forward, the kind of future steps that we wanted to take, we're currently working on a citizen science report. So putting all the data together, analysing it, and then being able to release this and be able to show what our data is actually pointing towards and the kind of trends that we're seeing. And also linking these into solutions, working with local authorities who have been involved already in the project, and understanding what can be done on more of a local level, whether there are certain trends at specific sites, as I mentioned with the Weaver and the bins there, or with the River Irk and the sanitary items issue, and understanding what's happening across the catchment. We also want to continue our community outreach and awareness. So our project logo was designed by some school students that we ran a competition with, and we want to do more of this and do litter art events with schools. Also continue doing public litter pick events that can encapsulate a wider audience, not just our citizen scientists that go out every month, but also training new volunteers as well. Also, we acknowledge that we do need a national response to be able to tackle local scale issues as well. So supporting comprehensive and feasible DRS and EPR schemes, and particularly including glass within the DRS scheme, as this is the top non-plastic item that we observe amongst our surveys, particularly glass bottles. And also having a recycling approach which is standardised and enables consumers to be able to recycle their waste more easily, especially with like more curbside options, and the extensive infrastructure required to support recycling for the country without needing to export as much of it. With the plastic containing wet works that we're seeing across the surveys, particularly on that one site, we're pleased to see a move towards banning them, and we'll continue to advocate for this. We also want to explore circular economy and new recycling tech options with our partners, and this is where the different expertise of the partners can come in and how we can display the problem to them, especially on the local area where some of their factories are located, and their investment in the local community. We can build on that within the project, and also what they can offer to us. Yeah, so thank you very much for listening. So like whistle stop tour of our project, and I think we'll take any questions after the next presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both. I am just going to bring in Alistair Knowles from our Rivers Trust team, who will follow that excellent presentation with a little bit of an intro on the Preventing Plastic Pollution project that we have been working on with some other Rivers Trust from across the movement as well. Ali, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all. Let me just get this going from the start so we can all see it, hopefully. You should be seeing that full screen by about now. So I'm going to start with a slightly obtuse way of starting. I have two twin girls, year 4, so about 9. And
sorry, Ali, I don't know if it's just me, but I'm not seeing it full screen yet.
Oh, not full screen, right? Okay. Okay, let me stop share and start again. 2 seconds.
Yeah, sounds good.
Let's try again. It should have gone full screen. Okay.
Still just seeing the general presentation window.
Yeah, it's being very slow at my end, and my computer is giving me that lovely, which means it's trying to work very hard. So here we go. Let's try again. Is it working now?
No, there's a button that says resume slideshow, so I don't know if you can see that to click on it.
Yeah, let's try that one. That's working this time, isn't it?
Yeah, brilliant.
Oh, it's great being an old person. I love it. I was really encouraged when I was listening to the Bristol Avon Rivers Trust guys chatting before the start, and they're much younger than me, and they too were worried about IT. So yeah, I've got twin girls, 9 years old, year 4, and they are studying Greek mythology this term, which is great. And they're particularly taken with the 12 Labours of Hercules. And it's with the Augean stables in mind that it's been great to hear this from the gathered hive mind of the Rivers Trust movement and all the volunteers and all the people engaged with the trust, with the Central Rivers Trust over yesterday and today. And it's you know, we might not sort out our rivers in a single day, but together we just might give it a good go. And with that in mind, I just wanted to focus briefly on this expression, we get plastics. We were working at the Rivers Trust and other trusts as well, South West Rivers Trust, South East Rivers Trust, and various other trusts too, on a big project called the Preventing Plastic Pollution Project. And this was 18 different organisations across England and France getting together, working together once again to try and prevent plastic pollutions. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. I wanted to talk very quickly about getting plastics. I think that plastics, you know, in so many ways, that nice play on words, getting plastics, it's something that involves absolutely everyone. And we can build connections around it. We can create custodians. We can enhance awareness around this because of the ubiquity of plastics. And I think another important facet that we need to think about here, and I think both Dave and Simon touched on this earlier, was the importance of the science with as the citizen science, and the science part of that being an engagement tool. And I actually think that through, once again, that ubiquity of plastics, we can reach a more diverse audience. Urban areas where we typically will find our ethnic communities, Black and Asian communities up in, whether it might be Birmingham or London or Liverpool, wherever it might be, we find different and more diverse communities in our urban spaces. We definitely know that where we find people, we find plastics, and the big conduit to our ocean and our marine pollution, of course, is our rivers. So the Preventing Plastic Pollution Project is another project feeding in the data to create this kind of picture. Some of you would have received an email from me fairly recently to create a newer version of this slide. But behind all of these lovely pictograms and these fantastic stats are people. And Tessa Wardley opened the whole conference yesterday morning talking about the key is working together. And I also really rather liked Arlen's "no one is more clever than everyone." So I think this must be talking about a combined effort, and it's that coming together that might just give us a chance to sort things out. So I'm going to flick on to, this is one of these sort of heat maps, which are perhaps more familiar. Heat maps might be more familiar to Match of the Day viewers than anyone else, but a heat map of volunteers' comments about getting involved with the Preventing Plastic Pollution Project and surveying the data that they found on a litter pick. There's something like, I think there's a little over 10,000 litter picking groups in the UK. So add in probably hundreds and thousands over in Ireland as well. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people out there litter picking. The difference that I think we have tried to incorporate is we've built stepping stones to go through levels of complexity to get better and more and methodical and very good data from a litter pick. I'm going to show you a slide in a moment, but this heat map here of comments from volunteers, these are not staff members, these are volunteer comments and a heat map, and making a difference is that connection of engaging the science and the community. So what we've done with Preventing Plastic Pollution Project is we start with depending on the group that you might be working with, and you will be working with litter picking groups in your community, we have a basic litter count. As you can see, it's got a reduced number of categories and questions. We then have that step up to an intermediate litter count, more categories, subcategories, more technical, slightly more technical breakdown of the things that we find littering along our streams and rivers. And then we move up to the advanced litter count. Again, even bigger, more categories, more subcategories. And I think this stepping stone is a really, really nicely designed way of bringing communities on board to begin with. I go back to that ubiquity of plastics. Everyone gets plastics. We all get the frustration when the people come and take your recycle bin and certain plastics are left and some are taken, and other people over the road get things done differently because they're in a different borough if you're living in London or something like that. The complexity of our plastics lives is being represented here with the stepping stones from a basic litter count up to an advanced litter count. And at the end of this, there's going to be a call for me to say, please get involved and drop me a line about seeing and having a look at this methodology, which is so important because it's giving us good, consolidated and consistent data about just what we're finding, litter hotspots. And I think this is, again, an opportunity with plastics. It was Penny Johns the other day was talking about there being, so was it something like tens of thousands of compounds when we talk about the things that we find in rivers. Josh, just a little while ago, was talking about there being 4,700 different types of PFAS chemical, 4,700 plus, I believe. Plastics are a simpler issue than that. We get plastics. Now, another thing we can also look at, using the methodology that's been created, this is a tool that is there for you, is we also break things down into a brand audit. And as well as looking at the brands that we find, we do also look at the different types of polymers, the different types of plastics that we find. And yeah, it does look a bit difficult at the start. And we've already had comment in the chat about sort of acronym bingo when you come to these kind of conferences, and LDPEs and HDPEs. You know, people do get their low density polyethylenes from their high density polyethylenes with a little bit of exposure to doing this kind of method, to using this method. People get it. Once again, you've led up from a basic survey up to a more complex survey, and here breaking it down by brand and also by the type of plastics that we find. This is a really good, usable and nuanced tool that enables your people, your communities together to paint a bigger and more accurate portrait of the waste, particularly the plastics waste that we find throughout all of our catchments. So it is about understanding the rationale. It isn't just litter picking. And I say just in inverted commas there. If someone goes out and litter picks, we can only be thankful to that person. Thank you. I'm one of those people that goes, I'm a plogger. I pick up litter on the go, and people sort of mutter at me as I mutter behind them, picking up a fag that they've thrown on the floor. But what we've done here is, if you like, is a litter pick plus, where we've added in this element of the science, the citizen coming together with the data that we capture around it. Think about those survey forms I've just showed you. And, you know, nice comment there, sort of haven't done this many tally charts since school. Well, you know, it is a reminder, it is a reconnection to our rivers. And again, I think plastics perhaps is an opportunity. I hate to talk about plastics an opportunity, but for us in this movement, it is to get people in every community from very diverse backgrounds connected with their local streams, their local rivers, or their canal. We know that there would be plastic, sadly, and we know that we can be part of the solution rather than presenting the problem of creating the waste in the first place. So really lovely to see these different kind of pictures here, and people head down, weighing what they're finding, getting that data for us. What we do with that is we have this superb, Josh has been involved, we saw him earlier, and the team at the Rivers Trust here, Annika, thanks very much. We create this lovely picture, and this is the targeted area in the Preventing Plastic Pollution project. What would be really great, I would love to see these dots spreading throughout the UK and Ireland. It would be great. I would really love you to get on board. Please email me. I'll put up a slide in a moment. Please email me asking about this method. I'll talk to you about it. We can go through the website. You can ask questions. We can, you know, talk to your communities, your community leaders about giving people a bit of training to get used to those data forms and uploading their data to this superb website that's been created by the team that paints this really accurate and consistent picture of the data that we have of the litter that we find around the country. So go away and have a little look at that after the conference has ended, of course. If you get a moment with a cup of tea tomorrow or Friday, have a little look at the Preventing Plastic Pollution website. There's a huge amount of assets on there that will be of use to you. So that is it really. I had 10 minutes, so sorry that it's a pretty quick whistle-stop tour through the looking at plastic and preventing plastics pollution, because we've got to talk about turning that tap off. And I think we can do that better with better data, knowing where the hotspots are, really drilling down into where the issues are, where might these plastics be coming from, and also knowing that we can be part of the solution. So there is a tool, there are tools and there are assets there. They just need to be put in people's hands. It could be your hands, it could be one of your group's hands. So go and have a look at the platform for the Preventing Plastic Pollution project. Please do feel free to contact me, ask me any questions, and if I don't know, I will know someone that will know the answers. So thanks very much, and I think we have a Q&A, and that should have been about 10 minutes. So thanks very much, and looking forward to some questions.
Thanks, Ali. Yes, we've got about 5 minutes or so for a quick Q&A. I'd also ask Hannah and John to come back on too. I'd actually like to start with just a general question to the group, and maybe I'll take answers one by one. You've worked on these 2 different projects, all of you. So what is the one thing maybe that you would like to see happen next? So Alistair, is it rolling out the data collection platform nationwide, or is it taking the data that's already there and using it for advocacy in some way? So if I hand straight back to Alistair first and then go with John and Hannah for that question.
I love it when people ask you questions that have the answers in them. It's both. So we definitely want to roll out, as I touched upon in my little brief 10 minutes there, we definitely want to roll it out across more catchments, more communities, and very happy to help you engage with those communities and get those surveys out there, get the Preventing Plastic Pollution methodology in front of people. And yeah, it is power to our elbow, knowledge being, so it's definitely both. The more data we have, the more powerful the case, the bigger the chorus, the louder the chorus. So want to roll it out, and yes, we will be taking the data to go and talk to multinationals, to go and talk to the lawmakers. And next year's a big year, 40 years for the Rivers Trust movement. I think there might be a general election, something to do with politics, for our 50th and hopefully a 50th new prime minister in about 4 weeks. So there's a lot to be done. It's definitely both.
Brilliant, yeah, and I think that's crucial in terms of like preventing plastic pollution was all about source to sea. So it's all well and good collecting this information on the litter that's there, but really we want it to not be there in the first place. And hopefully we're taking steps to do that. John or Hannah, did you have anything to add about what you'd like the next steps in the legacy for Plastic Free Mersey project to be?
I think there's something around behaviour change, which I've seen in the chat. There's been some discussion around already. About how we use as evidence now about the types of litter we're finding to really build on behaviour change, the different sectors of society and how we can influence that to prevent pollution littering in the first place. And also we've had some chat around in the Q&A and the chat around recycling of soiled plastics that we put out rivers. How do we achieve that? It'd be great to see some further progress in that. We're working with some organisations to look at that innovation to see how we can recycle dirty plastic better. So that's an exciting area, I think, going forward.
Brilliant. Hannah, did you want to say anything on that point?
Yeah, I think as well, just like providing really affordable options for people as well in terms of like consumer choice. That often the choice isn't always a choice for everybody, and initiatives such as like the one that's going on in Wales with refill and trying to get a lot of refill points across the country so that water plastic bottles aren't necessary, and so like enabling people from all backgrounds to be able to access those kind of options, I think is also something that can then go hand in hand with behaviour change, which would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe also I would add just a better understanding of where plastic is still a useful material, perhaps, despite its polluting effects. For instance, people with disabilities might rely on things like microwave ready meals. That is an important thing to consider as well. I've also had a question in about local councils. There's a lot of chat about all the disparity across local councils. Alistair, you hinted at it. Different councils will collect different types of plastics. What in your, and again, maybe this is one for everyone just before we finish, what would be the best ways to engage local councils, but I guess it also has to happen on a regional and national level to be consistent, to take plastic pollution more seriously? Ali, yeah.
Sorry, I thought I'd better put my hand up. I was just, I know we've pretty much finished here. So there was a question from Tony Brooker and Lorraine as well. I think this painting a more accurate picture of the complexity of our plastics life in this country. We have a lot more different types of polymers used in packaging in the UK than we do in, say, for example, Scandinavia or up in Iceland, places like that. And I think that if we have this standardized and very accurately captured snapshot that you can cut through and look at the different layers of plastics, that you can push local authorities to talk about making changes or indeed improving their recycle rates. And I think it's really interesting, to Lorraine's point, that the WI, I think it was 1953, a resolution was passed by the WI that begat Keep Britain Tidy. So WI have changed a lot of attitudes. They're a really powerful pressure group, actually, hundreds of thousands of members, and have done great things. And it's from, and I think, again, that is people, coming back to Tessa's point and everyone's point today about people coming together. To Tony's question about various local authorities picking up after river collections, very little of it is recyclable. That's the damage that the environment does to our macroplastics. But I think you are definitely going to reduce the microplastic load by reducing the macroplastics. And again, I think the picture that we paint can pressurize people to start talking about turning the tap off. And, you know, I'm not here to try and get groups picking up after multinationals. There must be producer responsibility, far greater, I believe. But I think that by capturing things accurately, you can paint a powerful picture that does back up your arguments when you go down to that old river and that big old clock and that golden building on the side of it, and talk to the people that work there.
Okay, I'm going to throw that question really quickly over to John and or Hannah about local councils, if you've got anything to add.
I think the key thing is engagement. So that's one of the key parts of our project, is to engage with the local authorities and the waste recycling authorities and understand their perspectives. So I definitely encourage people to engage with the local authorities, and that's definitely the best way forward, because they share the issue with us. They generally understand the issue as well and want to do the right thing. But you know, we all know that local authorities have got significant constraints on budgets and the like. But it's just definitely worth engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. Similar to conversations we've been having about like farmers and such yesterday, it's probably better to engage than to not, at least in some way. Hannah, can I take a final comment from you if you wanted to add anything to that?
Just backing up what's already been said, really, so not much to add on that, but yeah.
Brilliant. And then just a final question, because I don't want to ignore the question that's in the Q&A for you, Ali, just about the makeup of volunteers from the Preventing Plastic Pollution project. Have you found it to be quite a diverse group of volunteers, or maybe not as much as
no, it's nowhere near as diverse as we would all like it to be. But I did touch upon that briefly in my whiz through in my 10 minutes. We've got to be really intentional in this movement. We've got to be really intentional to go out to different communities, talk differently to them. And I genuinely think plastics could be the issue that we could coalesce that around, more than, say, something like 300,000 people in England involved in agriculture. I think there's about 92,000 farmers in England. Sorry to say England, I was just looking at some ONS data as we've been talking. But, you know, farming, huge amount of land, not many people involved. Plastics, everyone is involved every day, in their bath, in their shower tray, in their recycle bin, in their cupboards, in their kitchen. Everyone gets plastics. And I think we can make really intentional moves to talk to much more varied communities, wherever they might be, about the plastics in their communities and the part they can play to reducing the plastics in their life, and therefore putting pressure onto the producers of plastics in the first place. And that is crucial.
Well, how about that for a call to action? I think that's a good place to bring this morning session to a close. So thanks to all the speakers we've heard from so far today. Thank you.